Today we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, pulling off the highway and into those lonely, dimly lit rest stops, places meant for safety, but remembered for terror. From ghostly hitchhikers waiting under buzzing halogen lights, to cries that echo from locked bathroom stalls, these stories will make you question what's real and what might be lurking in the shadows just beyond the parking lot. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now. Because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. It starts the way these things usually do, on a road so long and straight that you forget it has an end. A highway where the asphalt feels like it might stretch on forever. I-45 between Houston and Dallas has always been like that. Endless, hypnotic, the kind of road that eats your thoughts until all you can hear is the hum of the tires and the wind pressing against the cab. Truckers know it better than most, and they'll tell you that stretch of blacktop is lonelier than it looks. Lonelier than you think it should be. Somewhere around midnight, when the gas stations thin out and the radio turns to static, you can find yourself at one of those old rest stops, the kind built back in the 70s, a couple of yellow lamps buzzing against the dark, a row of cracked picnic tables, and bathrooms that always smell like mildew and old urine. That's where people say she waits. They call her Mary, though no one knows her real name. She's always described the same way. Barefoot, sundress, hair hanging limp to her shoulders. The dress is light-colored. Some say white, others pale yellow, but everyone agrees it's stained near the hem, like she's been walking through wet dirt or worse. She waits under the buzzing halogen light, pale arms folded in front of her, like a girl too shy to ask for what she needs. Most say she doesn't move until you park. Then, if you're alone, she steps out from under the glow and lifts her hand, palm raised, a hitchhiker's signal as old as the highway itself. No one who's picked her up has had the same ending, but every story starts the same. You stop, roll down the window, and she leans in, her face shadowed but her voice soft, asking if you can take her north. Always north toward Dallas, though no one knows why. When she climbs in, she doesn't speak much. She'll nod politely, fold her hands in her lap, stare straight ahead. Some drivers say she smells of rain-soaked earth, that sharp, wet smell of freshly dug soil. And if you try to make conversation, she only smiles faintly, like she didn't hear you. It's always about 20 miles up the highway when it happens. You glance at the mirror, maybe to check the lane, maybe to check her, and she's gone. Not slipped out, not opened the door, just gone. What's left is that damp, earthy smell clinging to the upholstery, and sometimes a dark patch staining the seat like water that won't dry. The first story that ever made the papers was in 1979, when a trucker named Daniel Kramer swore he picked up a young woman at that exact rest stop. He told the sheriff she was quiet but polite, that she smelled faintly of mud, and that he looked back at her when he shifted gears only to find the seat empty. The sheriff laughed it off until Kramer returned the next day, frantic, saying his truck reeked of rot, and that he couldn't sit in the passenger seat without feeling like someone was pressing down beside him. The story might have ended as another lonely road hallucination if it weren't for what turned up behind that rest stop a month later. A hunter came out of the pines with his face white as ash, swearing he'd stumbled across bones. The sheriff followed him back, and sure enough, not 20 yards from the edge of the lot, they dug up a shallow grave. Female remains badly decomposed, but the coroner said she'd been there less than a year. No shoes, just the remains of a sundress clinging to the skeleton. The sheriff tried to keep it quiet, but news like that has a way of spreading. By fall, the truckers were calling her Mary, and the stories only multiplied. Some said she was a runaway who caught the wrong ride. Others swore she was a girl from Huntsville, last seen walking home after a fight with her boyfriend. There were whispers of a convict escapee in 1978, a man who disappeared from a work crew not far from I-45, and more than one old-timer swore he was the one who left her in the dirt. None of it was ever proven. The grave gave up no name, and the case went cold like so many do. But the sightings never stopped. One man I talked to, a driver named Alan, swore on his life he picked her up in '92. Said she looked solid as anyone, her feet dirty, toenails chipped. She asked if he was going toward Dallas, and when he said yes, she climbed in. They drove 10, maybe 15 minutes before he noticed the smell, that wet earth stink that filled the cab. He pulled over to check the undercarriage, thinking he'd run over an animal, and when he got back inside, she was gone. He didn't believe in ghosts before that, but he never took that stretch without praying again. The stories don't always end with her vanishing. Some tell it darker. There's one about a college kid in 2003 who picked her up late at night. He called his girlfriend as he left the rest stop, told her about the girl he was giving a ride. When the girlfriend asked who, he laughed, said her name was Mary, that she was quiet but sweet. That was the last call he made. His car was found the next day, pulled over on the shoulder with the hazards blinking, driver's door wide open, his phone lying in the seat. He was gone, never found. People still argue if Mary took him, if something else was out there in the woods that night, but either way, the story stuck. It's the smell that people always come back to. The smell and the stains. A young woman from Conroe once told her friends she saw Mary's reflection in her passenger window, just for a second, though no one was sitting there. The next morning, she swore her car reeked of wet dirt. She had it cleaned, vacuumed, shampooed, but the smell came back every time it rained. If you ask the old truckers at a diner near Huntsville, they'll tell you Mary isn't dangerous, not in the way most think. They'll say she just wants her ride north, that she can't rest until she gets where she was going. But there's always someone at the counter who shakes their head and mutters that it isn't about rest, that she doesn't want to arrive anywhere at all, that what she really wants is company, the kind she can keep with her in the dark under the pines. More than one driver swears that when she disappears from the cab, she doesn't just vanish. They say you can feel her breath on the back of your neck as you grip the wheel, hot and damp like the earth after a storm. A man from Dallas even swore he saw her face reflected in his windshield as he drove away. Lips smiling, eyes hollow. He left trucking that year and never set foot on I-45 again. I've been on that stretch myself more than once, and I'll admit I never saw her, but I remember the way the rest stops felt, how the light from the old lamps didn't quite touch the trees, how the air was always heavier there, full of insects and damp. I remember pulling in once around 2 in the morning and seeing nothing but the shadow of the bathroom building and a broken picnic table. But I couldn't shake the sense that someone was waiting just beyond the glow. The woods pressed close, and I thought about the shallow grave they'd found back there, about how many others might have been buried where no one ever looked. People still stop there. They have to. The highway is long, and exhaustion kills more drivers than ghosts ever could. But those who know keep their eyes forward, engines idling, never shutting the car off for long. They say if you sit too long, she'll come to the glass and press her hand against it, a pale palm smeared with dirt, and you'll have to decide if you're going to roll the window down or not. That's the story of Mary, the hitchhiker who never leaves. Some say she's still out there waiting under the halogen lights, barefoot in her sundress, patient as the grave, asking for a ride she never gets to finish. Others say she already found her ride, and that's why the woods are quieter than they should be. Why sometimes late at night, if you park alone on I-45, you can hear breathing in the back seat long after you swore you were driving alone. Highway 281 runs like a spine through the heart of Texas, cutting straight and merciless across hills, scrubland, and scattered towns that still hold on to their faded neon signs and gas pumps with chipped enamel. Anyone who has driven it at night knows the way the blacktop seems to swallow you whole, how the mesquite trees lean in like eavesdroppers, and how the stars look too far away to offer any real comfort. The rest areas along that stretch are a kind of oasis, but not the safe kind. They feel temporary, fragile like plywood sets in a play with fluorescent bulbs that hum louder than they light, and bathrooms that stink of mildew no matter how often they're hosed down. The one just outside San Antonio, the one people whisper about, looks the same as the others at first glance. That's part of what makes it so wrong. It looks ordinary. You wouldn't know what hides inside until you've already stopped. It was a father who told the story, and he wasn't the first, but he was the loudest. He and his boy had been driving back from San Antonio after visiting relatives. It was late enough that the kid was groggy in the back seat, head bobbing, sneakers still muddy from playing in someone's yard. They pulled into the rest area under a sickly orange light, the kind that makes moths whip themselves into a frenzy. The man said he just needed to stretch his legs and let the kid use the bathroom. That was all. No different from the hundreds of stops other families made along that stretch every single day. But the kid didn't come back. The details he gave were simple, blunt, like he'd carved them into his memory with a knife. They walked into the men's bathroom, echoing tile and the faint hiss of water dripping somewhere unseen. His son went into the last stall. He heard the lock slide shut. Then the screams came, high-pitched, panicked, the kind of screams that make you react before you even think. He kicked at the stall door, his shoulder slamming into it, wood splintering with a sound that stayed in his ears for weeks after. When it gave, he expected to see his son cowering, maybe hurt. But the stall was empty. Not empty in the ordinary way either. Empty like something had stolen the air out of it. Just the faint splash of water on the tile, as if the boy had melted into mist. The only trace left were damp footprints, too small, leading away from the stall toward the drain in the corner. They didn't wander. They didn't hesitate. They went straight to that iron grate as if pulled, and then they stopped. He said he dropped to his knees trying to pry the cover off the drain with his fingers, scraping them raw. He called the boy's name until his voice cracked. People came in, other travelers who heard the noise, but no one found anything. They called the police. They searched the grounds. Dogs sniffed, flashlights cut across the parking lot, helicopters churned the air overhead. Nothing. Not a thread of clothing, not a single footprint in the dust outside. It was like the boy had never existed outside of those wet tracks on the bathroom floor. The father wasn't the first to tell a story like that. Old-timers in the area, men who remember when Highway 281 was just a skinny two-lane cutting through nothing, mutter about the same thing happening before. Not often, not enough to make headlines, but just enough to settle into the bones of local gossip. Every decade or so, give or take, a kid disappears from that very rest area. Always a child, always from inside the bathroom. The pattern was easy to miss unless you'd lived long enough to see the years stretch and bend. Ask around at the gas stations nearby, the places that sell BBQ and cold beer out of battered coolers. And someone will lean closer and tell you they heard of a boy in 1981, a girl in 1992, another child in 2003. They'll shake their heads, cross themselves maybe, and say the same words, no sign, no trace. Just echoes down the pipes. Some say it's the old sewer system under the rest area. Built wrong, built on land that had been something else before the highway came. They whisper about tunnels that lead nowhere and water that never seems to dry. About the sound of crying if you stand in the bathroom at 2 a.m. with the lights off. Others talk about something older, about how the land there had been a crossing point for travelers long before highways existed. A place where people rested, where children sometimes wandered off and never came back. They think it's tied to the earth itself, as if the soil there has an appetite, a hunger that renews itself every few years. No one agrees on what it is, but everyone agrees that it isn't right. The father lost himself after it happened. He stayed in the area for weeks, refusing to go home, sleeping in his truck in the rest area parking lot as if the boy might come stumbling out of the bathroom at dawn, confused but alive. People saw him pacing the grounds at night, muttering, checking the bathroom over and over, listening at the drains. He started saying he could hear his son's voice under the tiles, thin and distant, like a radio tuned badly. He would press his ear to the floor, ignoring the filth, whispering back like it was a two-way conversation. The police tried to move him along. His family begged him to come home. He didn't listen. When they finally forced him out, he came back weeks later, gaunt and ragged, and no one's quite sure what became of him. Some say he drove off into the night and never returned. Others claim they still see him sometimes, parked along 281, staring at the horizon as if waiting. If you stop at that rest area now, and you're foolish enough to use the bathroom, you'll notice the last stall has a different lock, new metal, shiny against the old wood replaced after the incident. But the air in that stall feels heavier. The tile under your shoes feels damp even in the middle of August when everything else is scorched dry. Some travelers swear they've heard whispers in the pipes, voices that sound like children, rising up faintly when the wind rattles the vents. A janitor once claimed he found tiny handprints on the inside of the stall door, prints that were wet when he touched them, but vanished before he could show anyone else. The highway authority denies it, of course. They say the stories are just stories. But if you ask around, if you really listen, you'll learn that parents driving that stretch at night keep their kids close, sometimes even waking them up rather than letting them wander in half asleep. They'll drive an extra hour just to avoid that stop. And still, every decade or so, the whispers return. A child gone without explanation, A father or mother left with nothing but echoes and damp footprints leading to a drain that no one can seem to pry open no matter how hard they try. If you stand there long enough, if you listen to the hiss of water in the pipes, you might just hear the faint sound of breathing beneath your feet. Or worse, you might hear your own name whispered back at you from the dark. The rest stop sat on the edge of US 59 like a forgotten scar, tucked just south of Livingston where the pines gathered in thick walls along the blacktop. At night, the gas pumps across the road dimmed down and the highway quieted, leaving only the occasional rumble of 18-wheelers cutting through the dark. Travelers who pulled off here after midnight always said the same thing, though never in front of the locals. There was something wrong about the place once the clock hit 3. A kind of stillness that didn't feel natural. The air pressed close, the cicadas stopped their racket, and the only sound left was the low hum of the fluorescent lights over the bathroom building, buzzing like teeth chattering from the cold. Truckers whispered about it at diners down the line. Some said it had been a killing ground back in the 70s. A hitchhiker picked up and dumped in the woods. Bones buried so shallow the dogs dug them back up. Others swore it was something older, something that didn't come from men at all. The story always came back to the same detail, though. The knock. A slow, deliberate sound against glass, not the nervous tapping of someone asking for help, but the measured patience of someone waiting for you to answer. Clay Martin was headed south from Nacogdoches that night, trying to put miles between himself and the job he'd just walked out on. His old Buick shivered when he pulled it into the rest stop around 2:45. He hadn't planned to stop, but the road ahead shimmered in his headlights like black water and his eyes burned. He parked facing the tree line, killed the engine, and leaned his head back against the seat. He told himself it was just a quick nap, 10 minutes at most, but the moment his eyes shut, the weight of exhaustion swallowed him whole. The sound woke him. A knock against the glass just inches from his head. Not sharp, not angry, but steady. 1, 2, 3, a pause. Then again, he blinked into the dark and saw nothing but the faint orange glow of the overhead lamp spilling through the windshield. His heart jolted hard enough to make his chest ache. He sat still, trying to peer through the side window without moving too much. No one, just the faint reflection of his own face staring back at him. He told himself it had to be a branch. Maybe the wind had thrown something against the car, but the air outside was dead still. Then came the knock again. Same rhythm. 1, 2, 3. He swallowed hard and reached for the handle before his brain had time to stop him. The door creaked open and cool night air slid across his face. The lot was empty. The bathroom building stood across the cracked pavement, its door propped open like a crooked mouth. The pine woods pressed against the edge of the lot, blacker than the sky itself. Clay stepped out and turned in a slow circle. His shoes scraped against the gravel. He whispered hello once, low and shaky, but the word died before it left the air. No answer. He slammed the door shut harder than he meant to and slid back into the seat. He locked it all four and tried to laugh at himself. It came out thin, hollow. He leaned back again and told himself he'd leave in a minute. Just gather his nerves and get the hell out. The knock came again. Only this time it wasn't outside. It came from behind him, inside the car. His skin went cold. He froze, afraid to even breathe. 1, 2, 3. The sound pressed out of the dark back seat, soft but undeniable. He whipped around, eyes wide, but the back was empty. The folded blanket lay where he'd tossed it, the duffel bag half unzipped. Nothing else. Yet even as he stared, the sound came again, low and deliberate, as if knuckles pressed against the glass from inside the trunk. His hand fumbled for the keys. He jammed them into the ignition and the engine coughed awake. The Buick's headlights cut across the lot, catching the trees beyond. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw something pale between the trunks. A face, white, eyeless, too long. Then the shape slipped backward into the dark. His stomach turned to ice. He slammed the gear into drive and tore out of the rest stop, tires spitting gravel behind him. The road ahead blurred. He told himself not to look in the rear view, not to, but his eyes betrayed him. The mirror showed only the back seat and the faint glow of the dash, but his gut twisted all the same. He drove faster, past 70, past 80. The pine forest on either side leaned in closer and the yellow stripes down the middle wavered. He had the sickening thought that the road would never end, that he would keep driving until dawn never came. And then, above the roar of the engine, it started again. From inside the car, right beside his ear this time. 1, 2, 3. his vision blurred with tears. He swerved hard onto the shoulder, gravel spraying, and braked so violently the seatbelt cut into his chest. He shoved the gear into park and clawed at the handle. He stumbled out onto the shoulder, gasping for air. The night stretched wide around him, endless black highway cutting through endless black woods. The Buick sat idling, its headlights glaring into nothing. The knock came once more, muffled but clear against the inside of the windshield. His own reflection stared back at him in the glass, pale and shaking, but the sound didn't match the movement. The knock came steady, patient, as though it had all the time in the world. When Clay backed away, the car door swung open on its own. Not a gust, not a slip, but slow, deliberate, as if someone on the other side had finally decided to let themselves in. He turned and ran into the dark woods, branches tearing at his arms and face, the sound of his own ragged breath chasing him deeper. Behind him, faint at first and then louder, came the rhythm he could never outrun. 1, 2, 3. From the trees, from the ground, from inside his own skull. Always steady, always patient. No one saw Clay Martin again after that night. His Buick was found a week later, parked neatly on the shoulder outside Livingston, its headlights dead, its trunk locked from the inside. Deputies who popped it open swore they never saw anything but an empty space lined with dust and carpet. But the youngest of them admitted later, in hushed voice over too many beers, that he'd heard something faint before it opened. A soft, deliberate sound, a knock, 1, 2, 3, and he swore it hadn't stopped, not even after the trunk lid was raised to the night sky. The highway stretches flat and endless across the West Texas desert, a black ribbon laid over pale sand and mesquite scrub, shimmering with heat in the daylight and drowned in shadows after the sun drops. Rest areas are scattered far apart out here, lonely islands of cracked concrete, humming soda machines and battered picnic tables. One of those sits about 40 miles east of Van Horn, tucked back from I-10 behind a line of brittle salt cedars. Truckers know it, ranchers too, and a few weary families trying to get from Houston to Phoenix without falling asleep at the wheel. It is a bleak little spot, with a dim bathroom, a pair of rusting barbecue pits, and a busted light pole that clicks but never comes on. In 1992, a camper pulled in late one summer night and never came back. He was driving a small RV, the kind retirees buy with big dreams of national parks and wide open roads. Witnesses said he was a man in his 50s traveling alone, maybe with a dog, though no dog was ever found. The RV parked near the far end of the lot, away from the semis that growled their engines through the night. By morning, it sat with the doors wide open. The food on the counter was untouched, the bed unmade, a coffee cup still warm on the little table. He had vanished, leaving behind everything, including his keys on the counter. Rangers said coyotes must have dragged him off. Maybe he stepped outside half asleep and never made it back. But truckers shake their heads when the story comes up. Coyotes don't lock the doors from the inside, and someone in the early hours of that morning had slid the bolt shut before opening it again. People still pull over at that rest area, though not for long. The locals call it the dead stop. They say if you cut your engine there at night, the desert goes unnaturally quiet. Not quiet like the usual night when cicadas buzz and wind rattles the branches, but hollow, muffled, as though the air itself thickens and listens. Travelers who stayed too long talk about the feeling of being watched from the tree line. Some swear they saw shadows moving where there should have been none, something slipping between the cedars long and low, neither man nor animal. In the weeks after the camper disappeared, patrol officers found tire tracks circling the lot at odd angles, wide arcs like someone drove in endless loops before suddenly stopping. The prints were shallow, half scrubbed out by the wind, but they all ended at the same place, the space where the RV had been parked. One highway patrolman named Clay Torres spent more nights than he wanted at that stop. He had been one of the first on scene in '92. What haunted him wasn't the emptiness of the RV or the fact the man was simply gone, but the smell. Clay told a colleague years later after he'd quit the force that the air inside the camper was wrong. Not foul like rot, not sharp like blood, but metallic, coppery like ozone after lightning clinging to the curtains and cushions. The colleague asked if maybe it was spilled chemicals or something electrical burning. Clay only shook his head. He said the worst part was when he touched the table, the one with the still warm coffee cup. He felt the faintest hum under his fingers, as if a current ran through the laminate. He pulled his hand back fast and never told anyone officially, not wanting to get laughed at or benched. But it stayed with him until his dying day, and when he drank too much, he warned his kids never to stop at the dead stop, not even in daylight. Stories build like sediment in a place like that. By the late 90s, people said they saw an RV driving slow down I-10 at night, matching the description of the missing man's, white with a faded stripe down the side, curtains drawn tight. It would appear in a driver's mirror just before dawn, following for miles without passing and then vanish when they took the next glance. Some claimed if you rolled down your window you could hear music faintly leaking from it, an old country station heavy on static. A trucker out of El Paso swore he once saw a man standing inside at the sink, rinsing a mug over and over though no water ever spilled. That trucker quit long haul not long after. The state eventually fenced off part of the rest area, citing erosion, but the chain link doesn't keep people out. Kids dare each other to climb over and sit at the picnic tables. They tell each other about the dog scratching on the bathroom door, a dog that was never found but whose nails leave fresh marks in the wood. Others whisper about a light that flickers across the lot around 3 a.m., bobbing like someone carrying a lantern, moving between the barbecue pits and the bathroom. No lantern has ever been found, and no one brave enough has followed it far. They say if you try, the light drifts out into the desert until the road is just a glow behind you, and then it goes dark, and the silence swallows you whole. In 2008, a family from Louisiana stopped there on their way west. They were tired, fighting. The father wanted to push on, but the mother insisted they all needed sleep. They parked, ate sandwiches inside the RV, and finally bedded down. Sometime in the night, their youngest daughter woke screaming. She told them a man had leaned in through the window above her bed. The father got out with a baseball bat and circled the vehicle. No footprints, no voices, no one out there. But when he came back in, the door wouldn't latch. The bolt slid across, then snapped open on its own as though unseen hands played with it. They left without another word, driving bleary-eyed until dawn, and later said they never stopped anywhere in Texas again. By now, the vanishing camper has become a piece of desert folklore, tucked between ghost stories of La Llorona and the Marfa lights. But the difference is the tangible evidence, the open RV, the coffee cup, the hum under the table. Truckers swear they feel a draft of air when passing that mile marker, even with windows sealed. Rangers won't stay there after dark, and every now and then, a vehicle parked overnight simply isn't occupied by morning. Nobody goes missing on record anymore, not officially. But when police are asked why a sedan sits abandoned in the lot with doors flung wide and the engine still ticking cool, they shrug and mutter about stolen cars or runaway teens. People accept it. They want to accept it. Because the alternative is harder to believe, harder even to say aloud, that out here under the wide, starless desert sky, there are places where a man can be pulled clean out of the world, not dragged into brush, not taken by hands or teeth, but peeled away, unstitched from the fabric of everything he knows, leaving only the echo of what he touched last. A bed unmade, a meal not eaten, a cup still warm on the table, and in the silence, if you listen close, the faintest hum like current running under the desert floor, waiting for the next weary traveler to cut their engine and rest too long. Highway 90 was always lonelier after sundown. The stretch near Del Rio cut across scrubland and mesquite, a black ribbon vanishing into desert and darkness, with only the occasional headlights breaking the stillness. Truckers knew to keep their eyes ahead and their speed steady, because strange things happened out there after midnight. People whispered about lights in the distance that weren't headlights, about coyotes that stared too long from the roadside, about something that moved between the thorn trees. But most of all, they whispered about her, the woman in the woods. Folks said she came out after midnight when the air grew still and even the insects seemed to hush. Long black hair, tangled and heavy as if wet, hanging over her face. A torn white dress streaked with dirt. Her hands were always clawing at the bark of the mesquite trees, long fingers digging grooves into the wood, and if you were foolish enough to look, really look. She stared back with eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the darkness around them. Sometimes she only stared. Sometimes she smiled. And sometimes they said she ran. Miguel Lopez first saw her on a humid September night. He was driving home from a shift at the refinery, dog-tired, the kind of tired where the lines on the highway blur into one. The air conditioning in his old Dodge had long since quit, so he had both windows down, hoping the warm wind would keep him awake. The radio was nothing but static between the stations. That's when he saw the movement. Something pale in the tree line off to the right. At first he thought it was a deer, maybe the underbelly catching the light, but when he turned his head he saw the shape. A woman. Standing half hidden in the brush, her white dress fluttering slightly though the air was still. She was facing the trees, both hands pressed flat against a thick mesquite trunk. As he passed, her head turned sharply, her hair shifting just enough for him to see the teeth. She was smiling. He almost swerved off the road. When he looked again in the mirror, she was gone. Not faded, not walking back into the shadows. Gone, as if she'd never been there. He told himself it was fatigue, tricks of the light. But when he got home, there were scratches down the side of his truck. Long, uneven grooves in the paint like fingernails dragged across metal. He tried to laugh it off at work the next day, telling his buddy Carlos. But Carlos didn't laugh. Carlos's uncle had seen her years ago back in the 80s, same spot along Highway 90. The uncle hadn't been right afterward. He'd started keeping all his windows boarded up, kept his dogs inside, wouldn't step foot outdoors after dark. People said he drank himself to death, but Carlos insisted it was her that did it, the woman in the woods. They call her La Llorona's cousin, Carlos said, but she don't cry. You hear her laugh, brother, you're done. Miguel didn't want to believe it. He avoided that stretch of highway when he could, but sometimes he had no choice. One night, about 2 weeks later, he was heading home again. Same hour, same lonely stretch of blacktop. He was wide awake this time, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles whitened. He told himself he wouldn't look to the right. He'd keep his eyes straight ahead and drive until Del Rio's lights appeared. But the problem was he could hear her. At first it was faint, like a giggle carried on the wind. Then it grew louder, closer, a high-pitched laugh that rose and fell, rolling through the desert air. His skin prickled and his mouth went dry. Against every ounce of his better judgment, he turned his head. She was running alongside the truck, bare feet slapping the dirt, hair flying behind her. Her hands were outstretched, clawing at the air, and her face was split wide open with a grin too large, too sharp. Her teeth like broken glass catching the moonlight. She wasn't out of breath. She wasn't even straining. She was laughing, keeping pace with 50 miles an hour. He slammed the accelerator, 90, 95, 100. The truck rattled like it would fly apart, but he didn't let up until he saw the lights of town. When he finally pulled into his driveway, heart hammering, he sat frozen for nearly an hour, too afraid to step out into the night. When he finally did, he found fresh scratches on the passenger side door. Not deep this time, just shallow grooves, but unmistakable. Word got around. Miguel didn't have to tell the whole town. Stories traveled fast in Del Rio. People started trading sightings like baseball cards. A couple swore she followed them all the way into town before vanishing at the city limits. A trucker claimed he'd seen her crouched in the median, chewing on something too big to be an animal's bone. An old woman at the diner said her cousin disappeared along that stretch back in the 60s, last seen hitchhiking, and that the woman in white was what remained of her, trapped between worlds. The sheriff shrugged it off as hysteria, but even he started warning travelers not to linger on Highway 90 after dark. No one agreed on what she wanted. Some said she lured people into the woods where they were never seen again. Some said she marked you, and once you'd seen her, it was only a matter of time before she came for you. The only thing everyone agreed on was that laugh. Sharp, unnatural, slicing through the silence of the desert night. Not the laugh of a person. Not the laugh of anything living. One night, Miguel disappeared. His truck was found parked on the shoulder, door hanging open, headlights still on. The keys were in the ignition, engine idling, radio hissing static. The driver's seat was empty. In the dirt beside the road, there were tracks, bare footprints, leading from the truck into the mesquite woods. No one ever saw him again. But they say, if you drive that stretch of Highway 90 near Del Rio after midnight, you'll hear her laughter carried on the wind. And if you're unlucky, you'll see two figures in the tree line, the woman in white clawing at the bark, and beside her a man with hollow eyes, smiling the same broken smile, running fast enough to keep up with your car. The old rest stop sat like a fossil along the cracked edge of Route 66, its gas pumps gutted, its diner boarded up, the wind forever dragging tumbleweeds through the parking lot, as if the place needed reminding that it had been abandoned decades ago. Travelers who still passed through the panhandle sometimes pulled over just to stretch their legs or to gawk at the faded signage. but most kept driving, spooked by the sight of something that seemed frozen in time. Of all the remnants, the most peculiar was the payphone bolted to the wall outside the men's restroom. Its receiver dangled on a frayed metal cord. The coin slot rusted shut, the keypad so worn you could barely make out the numbers. The phone hadn't worked since the 80s, but every now and then, when the sun was down and the desert stretched into black, it rang. Truckers told the stories first. Men in their 40s with miles behind them and no patience for ghost tales swore they'd heard the shrill cry of that phone while they fueled up or dozed in their rigs nearby. Some said it rang only once, sharp and loud like a warning. Others claimed it went on until someone, against their better judgment, lifted the receiver. And then came the whisper, always the same, a child's voice, quiet as wind through grass, whispering the listener's own name. No one wanted to believe it, but the panhandle is flat and empty, and nights out there last forever. The stories spread, weaving through bars in Amarillo and truck stops along I-40. A couple of teenagers from Shamrock decided to test it once, recording themselves waiting at the rest stop until the phone rang at 2 a.m. The recording caught the sharp jangle of the bell and one boy laughing nervously as he picked up. The tape went silent then, except for the hiss of wind, until the kid muttered a shaky curse and hung up. A week later, he stopped showing up at school. His parents said he'd been having trouble sleeping, hearing scratching outside his window at night. They thought it was raccoons. Then one morning, his bed was empty and his window was open, the screen slashed from the outside. He was never found. The highway patrol posted warnings, but curiosity is stronger than caution in lonely places. People dared each other, and others came chasing the thrill. Some claimed nothing happened. Others never said a word about it again. The common thread, repeated like a refrain, was the scratching, always a week later, always at night. Something small, insistent, scraping against the door. Not like an animal, but like fingernails. And it never gave up until you looked. Some swore they'd seen shapes through the bottom crack of the door, too low and too thin to be human. One man said he saw tiny pale fingers curl under the wood before he screamed and fired a shotgun blast through it. The blast blew a hole clean out into the yard, but when he checked, there was no blood, no body, only tracks in the dirt, tiny prints leading back toward Route 66 until they vanished. That's how the story reached me. I'd been driving west after a funeral, worn out and empty, the road stretching so far ahead it felt like I was driving into nothing. It was midnight when I saw the rest stop's faded sign flicker in the headlights, a skeleton of neon half buried in the dark. I pulled over out of habit more than need. The air was still, carrying the faint smell of creosote and dust. When I stepped out, the world was so quiet it made my ears ring, and then, cutting through the silence, I heard it. The phone. It rang once, clear and cold, the sound stabbing straight into me like an ice pick. I froze, staring at the phone's cracked plastic casing glinting in the weak light of the moon. The receiver twitched against the wall with each shrill chime. My body felt pulled toward it, as if the ringing wasn't just sound but a rope tied around my chest. Against every shred of reason, I walked forward, reached out, and lifted the receiver to my ear. The line was dead at first, only a soft hiss like someone breathing far away. My own name came next, whispered in a voice high and small, no louder than a sigh. I felt my stomach fold in on itself. It wasn't just that it said my name. It said it the way a child says something they already know, as if I'd been called from across a room I couldn't see. The whisper repeated it slower this time, stretching the syllables like it was tasting them. My hand shook as I slammed the receiver down. The ringing stopped. The desert swallowed the sound, and the world went silent again. I told myself it was a trick, a recording hidden in the phone by some kids, or maybe just my imagination stretched thin from the long drive. But a week later, I woke to the sound of scratching at my front door. At first, it was faint, like branches dragged by wind, but there was no wind, no trees near enough to touch the house. The sound went on, deliberate and slow, scratch, scratch, scratch. I sat frozen in bed, heart hammering, until I convinced myself it had to be an animal. I opened the curtains of my bedroom window to check the porch. That's when I saw the shape crouched low by the door. It was small, no taller than a child, its back arched unnaturally. Its head snapped toward me as though it knew I was watching. The porch light revealed skin pale as chalk, stretched too tight over bones, and eyes black and shining like wet stones. Its mouth opened in a grin too wide for its face, and in a voice I recognized at once, it whispered my name. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. The scratching started again, harder now, nails raking across the wood as if it wanted to carve its way inside. I pressed myself against the far wall of the bedroom, listening as it circled the house, scratching at every door, every window. Hours passed. The sound never faded, never tired, never relented. By morning, the scratching stopped. I opened the door to sunlight. The yard still, but the wood of my door was gouged with lines too thin and too deep to be made by any animal. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The next night, the scratching came again. This time I heard laughter, faint and gurgling as if from a throat that had never learned how to laugh right. I shoved a dresser against the door, stuffed towels under the windows, but the sound seeped in no matter what I did. Each night it returned, always just after midnight, always circling, always whispering my name. The neighbors started looking at me strangely when I showed up in town, eyes red and hands trembling. They didn't hear it, or maybe they didn't want to. And when I asked them if they knew about the payphone, they only shook their heads and changed the subject. I've stopped leaving the house after dark. I keep every light burning until morning. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time in days, and I know it's wearing me down. But the worst part is this. Last night, the scratching wasn't just at the door or the windows. It was inside. From the closet, from under the bed, from the walls themselves. And just before dawn, as I sat clutching a kitchen knife and praying for the sun, I heard the phone again, ringing from somewhere deep in the house. The picnic area sat off US 83 about 20 miles north of Laredo, one of those lonely roadside pull-offs with concrete tables, tin-roofed shelters, and overflowing trash barrels that never seemed to be emptied. Truckers sometimes stopped there to catch a nap. Families passed through on their way south, but for the most part it was empty, a place of cicadas, wind, and dust. In the daylight it looked ordinary enough, the scrub mesquite and prickly pear hemming in the lot, the road stretching out in both directions like a heat-shimmered ribbon. But when the sun dropped and the air thickened with South Texas heat, there was something about the place that made even the hardiest travelers uneasy. People complained of a smell, metallic and thick, coppery like blood, wafting from under the main shelter where the concrete floor was cracked and the paint flaked in curls. Police came once, years ago, after a woman called 911 saying the stench made her gag, and she was sure something was buried there. They brought dogs, dug down, found nothing but hard-packed earth, roots, and the occasional bottle cap or cigarette butt. For a while the complaints stopped. But they started again, always in summer, always at night, as if the darkness itself released something from below. Rudy Sandoval had worked maintenance for the county for nearly 30 years, and it was him they called when people griped. He hated that picnic area more than any other stretch of roadside he looked after. In the daylight, the stink wasn't strong, more like a faint tang, a hint of iron in the back of the throat. But after dusk, it grew into something animal, cloying, as though a slaughterhouse had set up just beyond the trees. Rudy tried bleach once, poured gallons into the cracks, let it fizz and bubble while he stood back coughing. The next night, the smell was worse. He told his supervisor, who shrugged and said it was probably stagnant water or a dead javelina under the brush. Rudy didn't argue, but he noticed the way the supervisor avoided his eyes, as if he knew something he didn't want to say. In August of that year, a family from San Antonio pulled in after midnight, the father bleary from driving, the kids restless. They sat under the shelter, eating bologna sandwiches while the mother fanned herself with a church bulletin. The boy, 11 years old, went quiet halfway through his sandwich and asked if anyone else smelled pennies. The girl said she felt like someone was standing right behind her. The father laughed it off until he turned his head and swore he saw a shadow slide along the concrete, quick as a snake, and vanish into the dark. They left so fast they forgot the cooler, which sat there for days until Rudy hauled it off, its contents rancid. That same week, 2 Border Patrol agents stopped for coffee at the area around 3 in the morning and reported the same smell. So strong their eyes watered. They searched the brush with flashlights, thinking maybe a body had been dumped, but they found nothing but a deer skull and a scatter of bones that looked picked clean years ago. By September, talk spread in Laredo that the place was cursed. Truckers swapped stories at diners about women in white drifting between the tables, about laughter in the mesquite, about headlights going out when rigs passed the mile marker. Most people laughed, but they lowered their voices when they spoke of it, and none of them stopped there anymore. Even the state troopers avoided it, preferring to drive on until they found another place to park. Rudy heard one trooper say that when he pulled in to take a leak, he heard crying, soft and low, right under the shelter. When he shined his light there, nothing but cracked cement. He swore the ground was damp, though, as if something had been freshly spilled. One night, Rudy decided he'd had enough. He took a shovel and a flashlight and drove out there himself. The cicadas were screaming. The heat pressed down like a hand, and the smell was so strong he gagged before he even stepped from the truck. He set his light on the ground, planted the shovel blade in the cracks, and began to dig. The dirt was hard, reluctant, as though it didn't want to give. Sweat poured down his back, stung his eyes. Every few minutes he had to step away and breathe through his shirt to keep from vomiting. He dug until the beam of his flashlight caught something pale under the soil. For a moment he thought it was a root, thick and smooth, but when he scraped more earth away, he saw it was a bone. Human. A femur, snapped in half. His stomach turned to ice. He kept digging, frantic now, uncovering ribs, a jaw with teeth still locked, the curve of a skull. There were too many bones for one body, tangled together like they'd been poured into the earth and forgotten. He stumbled back, fell against the picnic table, and when he looked down, he saw the concrete stained black where his boots had tracked. The stink was overwhelming, filling his nose, his lungs, like he was drowning in it. He ran to the truck, but when he opened the door, he froze. In the rearview mirror behind him, under the shelter, something was moving. Not a person. Not exactly, but a shape. Slick and wet, writhing as if the bones he'd uncovered had knitted themselves into something new. It rose unsteadily, arms too long, head lolling, mouth open in a soundless scream. The stink poured off it in waves, blood and rot. The coppery tang magnified 100 times. Rudy slammed the truck into gear and tore out of there. Gravel spitting, heart hammering so hard he thought he'd die before he reached the highway. He didn't look back, not once. The sheriff came out the next day with deputies, but when they dug where Rudy said he had, the hole was filled, the dirt smooth, no sign of bones. The sheriff gave Rudy a long look, the kind that says you've lost your mind, and told him to go home, get some rest. Rudy retired early that fall. Wouldn't go near that stretch of road again. The county let the picnic area rot. The paint peeled, the trash barrels rusted through, the tables cracked. Nobody stopped there anymore, except maybe the occasional lost traveler, and those who did never lingered. But on hot nights when the cicadas shriek and the air is thick as soup, the smell still rises from under the shelter, coppery and sweet, clinging to the back of the throat, as if the earth itself is trying to breathe. And if you stay too long, if you breathe it in deep, some say you'll start to hear the crying too, soft and low, until you realize it's coming from your own mouth. The blacktop of I-35 stretched endlessly north, a river of headlights and red taillights cutting through the dark Texas night. The highway between Austin and Waco was a strange place after midnight, equal parts lonely and alive, a limbo where truckers barreled forward in convoys and lone sedans drifted through the shadows. Anyone who had driven it long enough knew the feel of it, the way the cicadas buzzed in the fields, the way the lights from distant gas stations seemed to shimmer like mirages, the way the air itself carried a kind of humming tension. That was the setting for what people whispered about in diners and roadside bars. The phantom patrol car that pulled you over and left you changed forever. Jacob Massey was driving north just past Georgetown, the clock on his dash glowing 1:07 a.m. He'd been on the road for hours, making the long trip from San Antonio to Dallas after visiting his sister. The night was cool, the asphalt damp with a sheen from a drizzle earlier in the evening, and the air smelled faintly of wet grass and diesel exhaust. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the gear shift, the soft hum of classic rock barely audible from the radio. He was between exits, a stretch where the road flattened out into miles of farmland, when he noticed them, headlights in his rearview mirror gaining on him. At first he thought little of it. Plenty of truckers sped through here, and more than a few impatient college kids took the highway like it was their personal racetrack. But then the light steadied close behind, and the silhouette of the car revealed itself. A Ford Crown Victoria, unmistakable in its shape, with a bar of red and blue lights mounted across the roof. Jacob cursed under his breath. He'd been careful about his speed, holding steady just a notch under 75. But maybe the cop had caught something he hadn't noticed. Sure enough, the bar flickered to life, the pulsing red and blue washing over his interior, the lights reflecting against the wet pavement. He slowed and pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath his tires, the Crown Vic sliding in smoothly behind him. His window was already down when the officer approached. At first glance, the man looked like any state trooper Jacob had seen. Wide-brimmed hat, tan uniform, polished belt. But as he leaned closer, the glow from Jacob's dashboard light revealed something that didn't sit right. The officer's skin was pale, not pale like someone who worked nights, but pale like something drained of blood. His lips were a dusky blue, as though he'd been standing in the cold for hours. His eyes, gray and flat, seemed to catch no reflection of the headlights. "License and registration," the officer said. His voice was low, rasping, like words pushed through a throat too dry. Jacob fumbled for his wallet and the insurance slip, handing them over without a word. The man took the license between fingers that looked oddly stiff, the skin waxy. He studied it without moving his head much, then flicked his gaze back at Jacob. "You keep it steady," the officer muttered. Then, without another word, he handed back only the registration slip, tapped the roof of the car twice with his rigid knuckles, and walked away. The Crown Vic's lights blinked once, then died, and the car pulled smoothly back onto the highway. Jacob sat there, his heart racing, before pulling back onto the road. For a while, the adrenaline kept him awake, sharp, focused. But 20 miles later, when he stopped at a gas station near Temple to grab a coffee, he opened his wallet to pay and froze. His license was gone. He tore through the wallet twice, then checked the seat, the floorboard, even under the mat. Nothing. His stomach dropped with a hollow thud. The officer had never given it back. The clerk noticed him standing there, pale-faced and sweating. "You okay, man?" Jacob shoved the wallet back into his pocket. Yeah, I'm fine," but he wasn't fine. He couldn't shake the image of the officer's face, couldn't shake the rasp of that voice, couldn't shake the color of those lips. He told himself he'd deal with it in the morning, maybe call DPS to report it, but as he drove north again, the thought kept gnawing at him. What kind of cop doesn't give back your license? And what kind of cop looks like that? When he finally reached Dallas at dawn, he was too wired to sleep. He searched online, trying to find some contact for the state troopers, maybe even a story of mistaken identity. Instead, he found something worse. Buried in local forums, old threads from years back, were stories almost identical to his. People pulled over on I-35 late at night, people describing an officer with pale skin and a voice like gravel, people saying he always asked for the license. And in every story, the license was gone afterward. Some claimed they got it back weeks later in the mail, no return address. Others never saw it again. One post in particular stuck with him, dated nearly 10 years earlier. A man described being stopped just outside Belton, the officer taking his license and vanishing into the night. The poster never got the license back. Instead, he began noticing things. His reflection in the mirror delayed a half-second behind his movements, a persistent ringing in his ears at night, and once, a man in a state trooper's hat standing in the corner of his bedroom. The post ended abruptly after that. Jacob slammed the laptop shut. He didn't want to believe it. He wanted to tell himself it was some elaborate prank, some urban legend designed to scare late-night drivers. But when he pulled his wallet out again, when he thumbed through the empty slots, he felt something colder than disbelief settling into his chest. 2 nights later, as he lay in bed in his Dallas apartment, he heard a sound outside his window. A slow crunch of gravel, deliberate and steady. He lived on the 2nd floor, and below his window was the narrow lot where tenants parked. He pulled back the curtain just a sliver and saw it. The shape of a Crown Victoria, black and gleaming under the orange wash of the streetlight. Its headlights were off. Its engine was silent. But in the driver's seat, motionless, was the silhouette of a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Jacob dropped the curtain and backed away, his mouth dry, his pulse hammering. He knew without looking that his license wasn't missing. It had been taken. And now, somewhere along that long, dark highway between Austin and Waco, something had claimed him. He didn't sleep that night, and in the days that followed, he noticed other things. His reflection wasn't quite right. His voice rasped when he spoke for too long. His lips, when he caught them in the bathroom mirror, sometimes seemed tinged with blue. On the 5th night, as he drove aimlessly around Dallas trying to outrun the dread, a set of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, a Crown Victoria, steady, patient, following close. Jacob felt his throat tighten. He knew with a certainty that hollowed him out, that when the lights came on and the bar of red and blue began to pulse, it wouldn't be asking for his license this time. It would be asking for something else. And deep down, he already knew he'd roll down the window. The highway was flat and empty. A gray vein stretched through South Texas scrubland that looked the same for miles in every direction. You could drive it half asleep and swear you hadn't moved at all. But Highway 77 carried everything: trucks, border traffic, students on their way to Corpus, oil men driving back from rigs, and at night it took on a different life, restless and haunted. Just south of Kingsville, there was a rest stop that nobody really wanted to use, not because it looked any worse than the others, but because people whispered about something that had happened there, and the whisper never seemed to fade. The story went like this. A woman stopped at the restroom late one night. Other travelers waiting outside said they heard her scream, sharp and sudden, then silence. When someone finally went in to check, she was gone. But one of the stall doors rattled hard on its hinges, as if someone inside was fighting, clawing, refusing to let go. After that, the stall door never quite stayed shut. Even when locked, it trembled and knocked softly, as though invisible hands still pressed against it. Most people who pulled off the road at that stop didn't know the story, but the ones who did crossed their legs and drove on. On a Tuesday in late October, Julia Martinez didn't have that luxury. She was driving from San Antonio to Brownsville, a stretch she hated, long and straight, where boredom turned dangerous and deer sometimes leapt into the road without warning. She had coffee and sunflower seeds to keep her awake, but the coffee worked too well, and halfway between Kingsville and Riviera, her bladder insisted she stop. She cursed under her breath when she saw the blue rest area sign, knowing there was no other option for another 30 miles, and swung her old Altima off the highway. The lot was empty except for a white pickup parked crooked near the back. Its windows were dark, no driver in sight, and Julia didn't like that, not one bit. She parked under a buzzing yellow security light, grabbed her phone from the passenger seat, and headed toward the low cinderblock building. The men's and women's rooms jutted out from the sides, each with a heavy steel door. She noticed the women's door was propped open with a rock. Her skin prickled. She told herself it was just a janitor trick to air the place out, but her gut nodded anyway. Inside, the air was damp, cooler than outside, carrying that sharp disinfectant tang that never fully masked mildew. The lights flickered overhead, humming. There were 3 stalls. The first 2 had doors wide open, the toilet stained and ugly but empty. The third stall door was shut, the latch visible. Julia hesitated. The door shivered as if struck from the inside. Just once, just enough for her to see it. She froze, then forced a laugh at herself. It was probably the air conditioning vent. Or maybe the hinges were loose. She stepped into the first stall, not wanting to think about it anymore, and tried to hurry. That was when she heard it. A faint rasping, like someone breathing hard through their nose, trying not to be heard. It came from the third stall. Julia stiffened, pants halfway pulled, and her first thought was that the pickup outside belonged to some man hiding in there. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, but she stayed frozen, ears straining. The breathing grew sharper, angrier, and then came the whisper. Not words, but a thin keen that rose high like a kettle screaming. Her heart slammed. She yanked her jeans up, half-buttoned, shoved the stall door open, and bolted for the sink. The mirror over the sink was cracked, spiderweb fractures that cut her reflection into shards. In those shards she saw movement, her own frantic face, but also something behind her. Something pale and crouched low, peering out from the third stall. She spun, but the stall door was open now, swinging gently, and there was nothing inside. Nothing at all. Her legs shook as she fumbled for her phone, wanting to dial anyone just to hear a human voice. Before she could, the steel entrance door slammed shut behind her with a metallic boom that echoed through the restroom. Julia's scream tore her throat raw. She lunged at the door, yanking the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone pressed against it from the outside, holding it closed. Then from the third stall came the rattling. The door she'd just seen hanging open was now latched tight, banging against the frame over and over, harder and harder, as if someone inside was throwing themselves against it. Julia pounded on the steel entrance, begging, crying, her phone slipping from her hand and clattering across the tiles. She dared one glance back and saw the stall door fly open, slam shut, fly open again, though nothing visible touched it. The toilet inside gurgled violently. water splashing up as if something clawed its way through the plumbing. And then she heard the scream. Not her own, but a woman's voice, high and tearing, coming from inside the stall, shrieking until the walls trembled. Julia covered her ears, but it drilled through her skull. She sobbed, pushed her shoulder against the entrance door, and at last it gave way. She stumbled into the night air, lungs sucking wind like she'd just surfaced from drowning. Her car waited under the light. The white pickup was still there. She snatched her phone from the ground, sprinted to her car, and locked herself inside. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key into the ignition. As she reversed, headlights flared behind her. The pickup's engine roared to life. Julia's chest went cold. She slammed her foot down and shot out of the lot, gravel spitting. The truck followed. For miles it stayed on her bumper, high beams flooding her mirror so bright she couldn't see. She pressed the accelerator, hitting 90, praying a cop would catch her, praying for anything but what was behind her. The truck stayed close, never trying to pass, never falling back, just blinding her with light. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it swerved off the highway onto a dirt access road and vanished into the dark scrubland. Julia didn't slow down until she reached a gas station outside Riviera, where she sat in her locked car until dawn, shaking. 2 days later, a DPS trooper pulled into that same rest stop after reports of a stalled car. He found no vehicle, but he did find the women's restroom door swinging open in the breeze. Inside, one stall was locked from within. He banged on it, announced himself, no answer. He peered under the door and saw nothing, no shoes, no legs. Still the door rattled, hard enough to shake the hinges. He pulled back and then came the scream, so loud he stumbled. By the time backup arrived, the stall was wide open. The toilet bone dry, not a drop of water in the bowl. But carved into the steel door with something sharp were 3 words, etched deep enough to leave grooves. Still in here. Witnesses swear the metal was warm to the touch, as if someone had just finished scratching the letters in. And every so often, late at night when the wind comes hard across the highway, the sound of a woman's scream cuts across the brushland, echoing from that restroom. Travelers say if you hear it, you don't stop. You keep driving, even if your bladder feels like it's going to burst, because nobody who's gone in there during the screaming has ever come back out again. Highway 287 runs like a scar through North Texas, a flat stretch of road where the sky swallows you whole and the horizon seems endless until it isn't. Wichita Falls sits off it, half ghost town, half military city with the Air Force Base buzzing in the background like a wasp you can't swat. That road has seen more wrecks, more midnight wanderers, more blood than anyone cares to count. And yet there are stories you hear that aren't in any police report. The boy on the bench is one of them. Truckers swap the tail in roadside diners, their voices dropping as if the kid himself might hear. He sits on a warped wooden bench at a wide spot in the highway shoulder, just where the road dips and the mesquite trees cluster like shadows. He's small, couldn't be more than 10, with jeans too short at the ankle and a red t-shirt so bright it glows against the dust. His head stays bowed, chin buried, as if he's ashamed or praying. When headlights catch him, the shine on his hair is too sharp like glass and his arms don't seem to move right. People who've pulled over say he lifts his face slow, asking in a flat, tired voice if you've seen his mom. And if you blink or glance at your radio or reach for your phone, the bench is empty, the red shirt gone, leaving you with the sound of your own breathing and a pulse that won't settle for miles. I didn't believe it. Ghost stories are currency out there, passed between drivers to break the monotony, and everyone's got one. But last summer, driving back from Amarillo, I saw him. My wife had stayed with her sister in Lubbock, so it was just me, a cooler of Dr. Pepper, and the endless hiss of the tires. The sun had burned down hours ago, and the dark had that heavy Texas weight to it, pressing in through the windshield. I was humming to keep myself awake when my high beams washed over a bench I swear I'd never noticed before. And there he was, just like the story said. Jeans, red shirt, head down. I slowed. Something in me, a reflex maybe, wanted to check because kids don't sit alone on benches at midnight 40 miles from town. The air conditioner hummed like static as I pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under my tires, too loud in the silence. My headlights hit the bench straight on. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept his head bowed. I rolled the window down, the smell of dry weeds and asphalt rushing in. Hey, I said, my voice too loud. You all right, buddy? Nothing, he just sat. His shoulders looked so small, the kind of thin that comes from missed meals. I killed the engine, the sudden quiet pressing on my eardrums, and got out. The night was too still. No cicadas, no highway hum except in the far distance. My boots scuffed the gravel as I walked closer. When I got within 10 feet, he raised his head. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed by the dark, and when he spoke it was soft but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "Have you seen my mom?" The word sent something crawling down my spine. I opened my mouth but nothing came. I forced myself to swallow. "Where did you last see her?" My voice cracked. His eyes flicked past me, toward the road, toward nothing, and then he lowered his head again. I wanted to reach for him, to put a hand on his shoulder, but something deep in my chest screamed not to. My hand trembled in the air between us before I dropped it. I turned back toward my truck, fumbling for what to say, and that's when my headlights flickered. Just a blink, but enough to throw shadows across the weeds. When they steadied again, the bench was empty. No boy, no red shirt, just wood and shadow. I swear I hadn't looked away for more than a heartbeat. The sound of my own breath roared in my ears. I backed toward the truck, every step heavy, my eyes never leaving that bench. I climbed in, locked the doors, and started the engine with hands slick on the wheel. As I pulled back onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The bench sat there, small and crooked, lit by the fading glow of my taillights. Empty. I didn't tell anyone for weeks, not even my wife. But I started digging. Local archives, old newspapers. Wichita Falls has its share of tragedy, more than most towns. Car wrecks, missing persons, the river taking more than it gave back. I found a clipping from 1989. A woman named Lorraine Diaz had disappeared on 287. Her car found abandoned on the shoulder, the back door open. Her son, age 9, was never located. The picture showed him in jeans and a red t-shirt. His head was tilted down like the camera had caught him mid-blink. Since then, I've heard more. A college kid swears she saw him last fall, her Honda breaking down on that same stretch. A trucker says he nearly swerved into the median when the boy appeared on the bench out of nowhere. They all say the same thing. Jeans, red shirt, head down, asking about his mom. And gone if you so much as blink. Some say if you answer him wrong, say you haven't seen her, or worse, ignore him, something follows you. Lights in your mirror, shapes in the dark corners of your car, the sound of breathing where there shouldn't be any. I didn't want to believe that part. But sometimes when I drive that highway, I catch a flash of red in the ditch, gone before I can be sure. Once, in the reflection of my passenger window, I swore I saw a boy sitting beside me, chin buried in his chest. I refused to look straight at him. I kept driving, lips moving in a prayer I didn't know I remembered. When I finally risked a glance, the seat was empty. Highway 287 stretches forever, but there are places where the world feels thin, where the past leaks through. Wichita Falls has more than one of those places. But the bench, the boy, his voice asking if you've seen his mom, that's the one that keeps me up nights. Because sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear him again, soft and sharp as broken glass, asking, and I wonder what will happen the night I finally answer. The rest stop off Highway 69 outside Tyler looked like any other dot on the endless asphalt. A squat concrete building, humming fluorescent lights that buzzed louder than cicadas, a vending machine stocked with candy bars that tasted like cardboard, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap disinfectant. Truckers and weary families came through at all hours, but the stories always started in the men's bathroom, with the far sink beneath the cracked mirror. I heard about it from a man at a bar in Tyler, late one night when the jukebox was broken and the place smelled like stale beer and sweat. He swore he'd stopped there just to splash water on his face before finishing the drive north. And when he twisted the handles on the faucet, nothing came out, but a steady dripping sound echoed through the tiled room. He leaned close, peered into the drain, and the drops kept falling, dark and slow. When one splashed onto his hand, he told me it wasn't water at all. He said it stained him, a deep rusty red, and even when he scrubbed at it with soap in the sink and later with bleach at home, it never came off completely. His hand had a shadow on it like something burned into the skin. He rolled up his sleeve and showed me, and I'll be damned if there wasn't a faint maroon smear running across his palm like dried blood. Curiosity gets the better of men like me. I was driving back from Houston a week later, past midnight, when I decided to stop there. The parking lot was empty except for a lone 18-wheeler idling with no driver in sight. The night air was heavy and still, warm enough that my shirt stuck to my back and the lights around the rest stop flickered like they were straining to stay alive. I went inside. The bathroom door groaned when I pushed it open and the air was damp, thick with the scent of mold and piss. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, and then I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. The sound wasn't coming from the nearest sink, but from the farthest one, just like the man said. The faucet handles were turned tight. The pipes beneath rattled faintly like something was moving inside them. The sink basin had brown stains spidering out from the drain. I leaned closer. The drops were thick, and in the buzzing light they looked darker than water should be. My throat tightened. I reached out one finger against my better judgment and let one of the drops fall on it. It was warm. Not like fresh blood warm, but body temperature, unsettlingly alive. I rubbed my fingers together, and when I lifted them into the light, they left a streak that was red as any cut I'd ever seen. I went to the next sink over, twisted the faucet, and clean water came gushing out. I scrubbed my finger until the skin went raw, but the red wouldn't budge. It just smeared. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was rust from the pipes or something mundane. But when I looked up at the mirror above the sink, I froze. My reflection wasn't moving the same as me. It lagged just a fraction of a second, like a bad signal. My reflection's eyes looked duller too, darker, and the smear on its hand spread wider than mine, crawling like ink soaking through paper. I stumbled back, but the dripping sound grew louder, echoing off the tile until it seemed like there were a dozen faucets running full blast. The floor under my shoes felt slick. I looked down and saw dark puddles spreading from the drains, creeping across the tiles toward me. I bolted out of there, shoved the heavy bathroom door closed, and didn't stop until I was back in my car, heart hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. I drove straight through to Tyler, but when I got home I couldn't shake the smell. It clung to me, that iron tang, like old coins and rot. I went to wash my hands again, and when I turned on my bathroom light, I swear the smear had grown. It stretched from my palm up to my wrist, and when I pressed at it, it throbbed like a bruise. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the dripping. Not from my sink, but somewhere close, like it was inside the walls, inside the pipes running through my house. Drip, drip, drip. Steady, unhurried, patient. The days since have been worse. The stain hasn't faded. It's spreading. My forearm now, my elbow. I tried cutting into the skin to see if it was just surface deep, but the blood that came out wasn't right. It was too dark, too thick, and when it hit the porcelain of my sink, it clung there like syrup. I've been avoiding mirrors, but sometimes I catch glimpses without meaning to, and my reflection doesn't look like me anymore. Its skin is grayer, its mouth hangs open like it's trying to speak, and its eyes, God, its eyes are wet, like they're filling up with the same thick drops from that cursed faucet. Last night I dreamed I was back in that rest stop bathroom, staring down at the drain. Something was pushing against the grate from below, something pale with long fingers and black nails reaching up toward the surface. When I woke, my bedsheets were damp with the same red stains. I don't know how long I can keep this from consuming me. The dripping follows me everywhere now. In my car, in my bedroom, even when I sit outside trying to escape it, I hear it, steady and relentless. People say it's just a story, a roadside tale to spook travelers, but I know better. I've seen it, felt it, carried it home inside me. There's something beneath that rest stop, something in the pipes, and it doesn't care if you believe or not. It only needs you to stand too close, to lean over the sink, to let one drop touch your skin. Then it's with you forever, and now it's with me, spreading further every day, filling me drop by drop. If you find yourself on Highway 69 near Tyler, and you stop at that rest area, don't go inside. Don't listen to the dripping. Don't look into the mirrors. Don't touch the sink, because once it starts, you won't get clean again. Ever. And when the last drop falls, I think whatever is clawing its way up through those pipes is going to come the rest of the way out. The lot was nearly empty when Carl pulled in. The kind of desert rest stop that looks abandoned even when it isn't. Just a squat cinderblock building with bathrooms that smelled of bleach and mildew. A row of soda machines buzzing against the wall and gravel crunching beneath his tires. He had been driving I-20 since Odessa. His eyelids heavy, the dash clock crawling toward midnight. The air was thick with that dry Texas heat that never quite lifted even after the sun went down. And the mesquite trees rattled in the wind like bones strung together on a line. He killed the engine, stretched his legs, and told himself he'd only stay long enough to splash water on his face and buy a Coke for the road. The silence was the first thing he noticed when he stepped out. Not quiet, but silence. No cicadas, no distant hum of trucks, no desert night noises at all. The sodium lights hanging over the lot buzzed weakly. throwing out cones of pale yellow that seemed to stop short of the gravel edges. Beyond that, only darkness. He kept glancing back at his car as he walked toward the building, the sudden unease growing with every step. He had been a Texas boy all his life. He knew the moods of these roads, but something about that stretch of lot felt wrong, like he'd stepped onto ground that wasn't meant for people. Inside, the bathroom was worse. The faucet spat rust-colored water before clearing, and when he bent to splash his face, he caught his reflection in the mirror above the sink, distorted by scratches and old graffiti. His own eyes looked too wide, bloodshot, wary. He dried his face with a brown paper towel and decided he didn't really need the Coke after all. The urge to leave pressed hard at him. He tossed the towel, pushed open the heavy door, and froze halfway into the night. The gravel shifted. Not the wind, not his imagination. Weight moving across the lot, slow and deliberate. The smell hit next, rank like something dead and baking under the sun. He turned his head and saw it just outside the furthest cone of light. A dog, if dog was the right word. Huge, its shoulders as high as the hood of his car, fur black and ragged as if burned. Its head hung low, eyes burning red like coals raked from a fire, and when its mouth opened he saw teeth upon teeth crowding the jaw, too many to belong to any real animal. No sound came out, no growl, no panting, only silence as it stared at him. Carl's pulse hammered. He forced himself forward, gravel crunching under his boots, his gaze locked on the thing as it stepped into the light. It moved wrong, joints bending too far, too loose, like it had learned walking by watching something human. He broke into a run, fumbling for his keys, his throat tight with panic. The car waited just ahead, and he nearly dropped the keys as he shoved them into the door, flung himself inside and stabbed the ignition. The engine turned once, then clicked dead. He tried again. Click. The dashboard lights flickered and went dark. The air in the cabin grew stifling, and his own ragged breath filled the silence. He looked up and the dog was there. At the edge of the hood, its head cocked, red eyes fixed on him. Its jaws opened wide, stretching further than they should, showing row after row of jagged teeth that glistened in the weak light. Still no sound. It pressed its muzzle against the windshield, and though it left no fog, Carl swore he felt its breath against his face, hot and damp. His hand twisted the key again and again, the useless click echoing inside the cabin until he thought he would go mad. He pounded the steering wheel, muttered prayers, cursed, begged. The dog never moved, never blinked, only watched. Minutes or hours later, it was impossible to tell, the red glow in its eyes dimmed. The shape shuddered, fur rippling as though smoke was blowing through it, and it stepped backward into the dark. The silence of the lot deepened, and just as suddenly as it had died, the engine roared to life beneath Carl's hands. He threw the car into gear and tore out of the rest stop, gravel spraying behind him, tires shrieking against the asphalt as he merged back onto the interstate. He drove blind, headlights bouncing off the endless ribbon of desert until the shaking in his hands eased enough for him to keep the wheel steady. He told himself he'd imagined it, that exhaustion had played tricks on him. But when he stopped again for gas outside Midland, the attendant stared at him strangely as he paid, eyes darting to the side of his car. Carl followed the man's gaze and saw the hood, the windshield, the driver's side door, slick with wide, smeared streaks of black that stank of rot and iron. Like something had pressed against the metal with wet, heavy fur. He scrubbed it at the pump with paper towels and gasoline, but the smell clung. It was still there when he reached Dallas at dawn, when he pulled into his driveway, when he sat shaking behind the wheel, staring at his reflection in the glass. He never told his wife what he'd seen, only that he was too tired to make the drive again. He refused long-haul routes that crossed West Texas, refused night driving altogether. But every so often, when he parks the car after dusk, he swears he hears gravel crunching just beyond the light. And sometimes, when he catches his reflection in the window, his eyes burn red for just a moment, like coals waiting for a wind. Highway 6 runs straight and flat between Houston and College Station, cutting through farmland and pine forest, a strip of asphalt that looks the same whether you're driving it at noon or at 3 in the morning. I had driven it more times than I could count, especially when I was in school at A&M, and it always felt like one of those stretches of road that didn't want you there. The shoulders are narrow, the ditch is deep, and at night there's no light except what your own headlights give you. That's why when I saw her, I thought my mind was playing tricks. It was close to midnight, a fog settling low across the fields, and I was coming up past Navasota when the figure appeared in my high beams. A woman in pale clothes, her arms waving frantically, her mouth wide open like she was screaming, though I couldn't hear a sound. I hit the brakes hard, heart pounding, tires squealing as the car slowed. She was right there, 20 yards ahead, hair black and tangled, eyes shining white in the reflection of the lights. She looked like she was trying to warn me of something just ahead. I stopped dead in the lane and she vanished. 1 second she was there. The next the headlights shone only on fog and road. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I sat there staring, not sure if I'd imagined it. A horn blared behind me and a pickup roared past, its driver flipping me off. I almost laughed just to prove to myself I wasn't about to come apart. I drove on more carefully, telling myself it was some trick of the fog. A reflection. Maybe a drunk woman running across the road who had darted off. But about a mile up, there were brake lights in the ditch. A sedan crumpled against a tree, steam rising from the hood. I pulled over and jogged to it, fumbling for my phone. The driver, a man about my age, was slumped over the wheel, blood dark on his temple. He was still breathing. I called 911, and when the EMTs came, they said he was lucky someone had found him. I wanted to tell them about the woman, but the words caught in my throat. Later, at a gas station north of town, the cashier asked if I was okay. I must have looked pale. I told her what I'd seen, leaving out the details about the wreck. She froze, staring at me. "You saw her," she said. Her voice was flat, like she didn't want to say it but couldn't stop herself. She told me that people had been talking about a woman who appeared on Highway 6 at night. Always the same, waving, screaming, trying to get drivers to stop. Some folks claimed if you ignored her, you'd come across an accident not far down the road. Others swore that stopping was worse. "She don't always mean well," the cashier said, then refused to say more. That should have been the end of it, but it stuck with me. A week later, I was driving back from Houston after a late meeting, again on 6. Around the same stretch, my lights caught movement. My chest clenched. There she was again, pale dress whipping in a wind that wasn't blowing, hair sticking to her face, arms thrashing in warning. This time I pressed harder on the accelerator. I couldn't bear to see her vanish again. As I passed, I glanced in the rear view. She was still there, standing in the middle of the road, head tilted like she was watching me. A quarter mile later, red and blue lights flashed ahead. Another wreck. A pickup jackknifed into the ditch, troopers walking the scene. They waved me by and I did, my hands slick on the wheel. From then on, I heard stories. A friend of a friend said his cousin hit the brakes when he saw her, and his car died completely. No power, no lights, nothing. He said he felt cold fingers on his neck in the dark before the car started again, and when it did, the woman was gone. Another man, a trucker, said he stopped to help and she walked right up to his cab before disappearing in front of his eyes. Some of them said she was the ghost of a woman who died on the road decades ago, running from a violent husband. Others whispered she caused the accidents herself, drawing them like moths to a flame, feeding on the wreckage. No one could say for sure. One night in early December, I drove that road again. This time I wasn't alone. My friend Kyle rode shotgun. I told him the stories and he laughed, said I was losing it. "Ghosts aren't real, man. You just saw some crazy woman." But his voice was tight, and when the fog began to rise again, I saw him checking the mirrors more often than usual. Near the same stretch she appeared, this time closer, so sudden I almost swerved. Her arms shot up, her mouth open in a silent scream. Kyle cursed, gripping the dash. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The air in the car dropped to freezing, our breath fogging the glass. She was in the road and then gone, vanished into the beams. We sat in silence for miles until Kyle muttered, "What the hell was that?" When we reached College Station, we stopped at a Whataburger, both of us shaking. Kyle said he had felt something inside the car, a pressure in the back seat like someone was leaning forward between us. He swore he smelled dirt and rot. I hadn't, but I believed him. He never wanted to drive that road again. I tried to avoid it too, taking longer routes when I could. But sometimes you don't have a choice. The last time I saw her was the worst. It was raining hard, water pooling on the asphalt, windshield wipers thrashing uselessly. I was heading south near midnight again. The woman appeared so close I could see the water dripping from her tangled hair. Her lips moving fast, desperate. I braked, tires sliding hard in my throat. For the first time I swore I heard her. A raw scream that pierced through the rain. Then she was gone. I sat shaking, gripping the wheel when headlights flared behind me. A semi barreling down, horn blaring. I gunned the gas, swerving just in time to avoid being crushed. The truck roared past, missing me by inches. I kept driving, pulse thudding, and then I saw it. Not a mile ahead in the ditch, the wreckage of a small car crushed flat, its hazard lights weakly blinking in the downpour. There was no one moving inside. The police report said later that the driver had died instantly, probably hit the water and hydroplaned into the trees. I couldn't help but wonder if the woman had meant to save me from the truck, or if she had tried to stop me so I would end up in the ditch like the other driver. Now every time I take that road, I wait for her. I grip the wheel tighter when the fog gathers or when the rain slicks the asphalt. People say ghosts repeat themselves, doomed to replay their final moments, but the woman who warns feels different. She knows what she's doing. She chooses, and whether she's saving lives or claiming them, she's still out there on Highway 6, waiting for the next pair of headlights to catch her pale figure in the dark. I-45 at night is its own kind of country. The flat blacktop stretches in both directions like someone unrolled it from a spool, and the pine trees along the shoulder stand guard in silent ranks, broken only by yellow sodium lights over exit ramps and the occasional gas station, glowing like a bug trap in the distance. People think of Texas as desert and scrub, but around Huntsville it's deep green woods, swampy creeks, and the prison lights throwing orange halos into the humid sky. At night, with your headlights pushing against the dark and nothing ahead but that endless line, you get the sense that anything could come out of those woods, and sometimes it does. The first time I heard about the truck, I didn't believe it. A co-worker from the plant told me. Said he'd been driving home to Conroe after a late shift, maybe 2 a.m. He caught sight of lights in his rear view, high up like any 18-wheeler, but too close. He swore the thing came up on him so fast it felt like it was about to climb into his back seat. He sped up, went 10-15 miles over, and the truck matched him, blinding him with high beams, bearing down so close he couldn't see anything but chrome and light. Then just like that, it was gone. Not fallen back, not past, gone. He said his ears popped like pressure dropped when it vanished. He didn't laugh when he told it, and he wasn't the kind to make up ghost stories. He told me he pulled over at the next station and just sat under the buzzing lights, hands shaking too hard to put $1 in the vending machine. I brushed it off until I started hearing the same thing from other drivers. Folks who didn't know each other, didn't run in the same circles, always the same stretch, southbound I-45 somewhere between Huntsville and the Sam Houston statue. They described it the same way. The roar of a big diesel engine, the violent rush of air as the truck closed in, the blinding lights, the way it forced them to the edge of panic. And then nothing. No truck on the road at all. A couple of people claimed to have pulled off to wait it out and watch the highway behind them, swearing they never saw brake lights or tail lights receding into the night. There was a news piece once, a short one buried in the back pages. State police had found a tractor trailer on the shoulder near Huntsville. Engine running, lights on, trailer loaded with canned goods, and the driver's door swung open. No sign of the driver. No footprints in the dirt, no calls from his family, no credit card activity. He was just gone. The company that owned the rig had the truck hauled off eventually, but the troopers never stopped asking around. They had a picture of him on the evening news, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes and a sunburnt face, a man who looked like 100 other long-haul drivers. He'd been seen in Dallas that morning, filling up his thermos at a truck stop, and then nothing. The abandoned truck was found idling with a full tank of diesel. I used to drive that stretch every weekend, visiting my brother in Houston. The thought of that story always came back when I hit Huntsville. Past the prison walls with the lights burning all night, past the rows of pine, the air turning swamp-heavy, tires thrumming over blacktop. I'd watch my mirrors a little more closely, squinting against the glare of headlights behind me. I always told myself it was just rumor, just the way people let the dark and the trees play tricks on them. But there were nights when the highway felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. Like the world had drained out and left me alone on a strip of asphalt floating in black water. One night in July, I was heading back from Houston later than usual. The humidity was so thick it clung to the windshield, and the wipers made a soft squeak every pass. The road was nearly empty, just me and the yellow lines stretching away. Then far behind I saw a flicker of light, small at first, then bigger, brighter, climbing toward me. My gut clenched before my brain could argue. The lights rose high like a cab's, and the road around me started to glow white. The roar came next, not faint like a car half a mile back, but loud. So loud it rattled the dash. I checked the speedometer. 75. I pressed the gas. 80. The truck was still on me, close enough I couldn't see its grill, only light, like a wall slamming into the back of my skull. My hands were slick on the wheel, pulse hammering as the air shook with the force of it. I pushed 90, then more, engine whining, and still it bore down. The mirrors were useless, nothing but floodlight. My breath came ragged. I thought I'd lose control, thought the front tires would lift when all at once the sound dropped out. The lights blinked off. The road behind me was empty. I took the next exit on shaking legs and parked under a gas station canopy, staring at the nothingness of the dark woods. The air was dead still, no cicadas, no crickets. I sat there until another car rolled in, headlights sweeping the lot, and only then did I breathe easy. I swore I'd never drive that stretch at night again. But here's the thing. You can tell yourself it was nerves, that the mind invents shadows and sounds when it's tired. Except it isn't just me. Troopers won't talk about it, but mechanics at the impound lot swear the truck they found was still warm hours after it should have cooled, like the engine had been run to the red line. One guy claimed the odometer showed 300 extra miles than the log said it should have. And there are whispers that when they towed it, the smell inside wasn't just diesel and sweat. It was coppery, metallic, like blood dried into the floor mats. No one ever said that on the record, but men who've been working around trucks their whole lives don't mistake smells like that. Now, when you drive southbound near Huntsville, keep your eyes on the mirrors. If you see those high beams rise fast behind you, if you hear that roar like the whole night is tearing open, don't try to outrun it. Don't speed up. Because folks who do, some of them never make it to the next exit. They say the truck takes what it wants. A driver here, a driver there. And when the state finds another 18-wheeler idling on the shoulder, cab door swung open, radio hissing static with no one inside, they'll call it another disappearance. But you and I will know better. The truck isn't looking for a driver. It's looking for you. The lights at the rest stop were dim, some of them flickering like dying fireflies. The place was little more than a wide patch of cracked asphalt just off I-27, south of Lubbock, with a couple of picnic tables, a vending machine that hadn't worked in years, and a bathroom that smelled like mildew and ammonia. Truckers sometimes idled here in the dead hours, though tonight the only sound was the low hum of the highway beyond the mesquite and sagebrush. It was past midnight when the first travelers heard it, a baby crying. Faint at first, drifting on the warm Texas wind like a sound caught in a bottle and carried across the plains. A family of 4, tired from their drive, had stopped so their youngest could use the bathroom. The father heard it while leaning against the car, smoking. The cry came from the bushes, thin and sharp, unmistakably the wail of an infant. His wife froze in the doorway of the restroom, hand to her mouth, and the boy, maybe 9 years old, whispered that it sounded like his baby cousin when she was hungry. They searched, calling out, moving closer to the brush. The crying kept on, never nearer, never farther, always just out of reach. There was no stroller, no blanket, no child. Only weeds rustling, shadows shifting. After 20 minutes, they gave up, unsettled. A week later, a woman traveling alone pulled into the same rest stop. Her car was running hot, and she needed to let it cool before continuing north. She sat at a picnic table and opened a bottle of water, watching the night spread across the flatlands. Then she heard it. A baby crying, weak and shrill, from the direction of the brush at the far end of the lot. She thought maybe a mother had stepped away for a moment, maybe left a child in distress. She followed the sound, her sandals crunching gravel, her flashlight beam cutting across the tangled weeds. The crying grew louder, as if urging her deeper. Then it cut off, sudden and clean, replaced by silence so total she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She came back 10 minutes later, hysterical, clothes torn, arms scratched bloody by thorns. She claimed something had crawled after her. She described it between sobs as long, pale and fast, moving on all fours like a man who had forgotten how to stand upright. It had kept pace with her in the dark, just beyond the reach of her light, until she stumbled and ran blindly back toward the asphalt. She told a trucker who had just pulled in. But when he checked with his flashlight, he found only still weeds swaying in the wind. She left in a hurry, tires spitting gravel, promising herself she would never stop again at night. Stories like that stick. By midsummer, truckers were swapping tales about the place. Some swore they'd heard the phantom cries too, though none admitted to following them. One man said he saw a shape crawling across the lot, pale as candle wax, its limbs jerking wrong, head bobbing too loosely on its shoulders. He drove away without even stopping for gas, swearing never to pass that way again. The lot grew quieter, avoided even by the long-haul drivers who used to sleep there. Weeds crept higher, swallowing the fence line, and the vending machine gathered nests of hornets. Locals in Lubbock knew the story that went with it, though they didn't tell it to outsiders. Years back, before the rest stop was even poured in concrete, there had been an accident on that stretch of road. A woman driving alone, 9 months pregnant, went off the shoulder and rolled her car into a shallow ditch. She was pinned for hours before anyone found her. By then it was too late. When they pulled her body free, they found evidence she had gone into labor there in the wreck, her blood and water staining the upholstery, scratch marks raked along the inside of the windows. No infant was ever recovered. Some whispered the coyotes had carried it off. Others said the baby had never truly been born, that it came into this world wrong and unfinished, something between a child and a shadow. The wreck was cleared, the ground leveled, and a few years later the state built the rest stop right on top of it. That was the story anyway. Most didn't believe it, but there were enough people who did. Enough who refused to stop at that lot after dark, that the place took on a life of its own. If you were foolish enough to park there past midnight, the air seemed to change. The cicadas stopped their singing. The warm Texas wind went dry and cold. And if you listened closely, you could hear it, faint and thin like a radio signal caught between stations. A baby crying, lonely and desperate, always just out of reach. One September night, a pair of college kids from Amarillo stopped there, drunk on cheap beer and bravado. They had heard the legend and wanted to test it. They parked their pickup, killed the engine, and sat on the hood with flashlights and a recorder waiting. Around 1 a.m, the crying began. Both laughed nervously, swore it was coyotes. But when they played back the recording later, the sound was wrong. Too clear, too human, and beneath the crying, faint but undeniable, was something else. A voice whispering in a language neither could place. A dry, rasping whisper repeated over and over. They deleted the tape. Neither returned to that rest stop again. The Department of Transportation considered shutting the place down. Too many complaints, too many strange reports from travelers, but they didn't. The land was cheap, the highway needed a rest area, and people forget. Always people forget. Yet sometimes if you drive I-27 late at night and the highway miles start to stretch, you'll see the exit sign glowing faint in the dark. You might need to stop just for a minute, just to rest your eyes, and if you do, you may hear it. The crying will come from the brush, soft and plaintive, tugging at something primal in you. You'll think you're too smart to follow, that you'll stay by your car, but the sound will work on you. It will make you picture small fists and tiny lungs straining in the dark. It will make you forget how many others walk that same path, drawn by compassion, by curiosity, by guilt. The weeds will part, the night will swallow you, and something pale and hungry will follow on all fours. And when you run, if you run fast enough to make it back to the asphalt, to the dim halo of the rest stop lights, you'll swear it was only your imagination. But when you sit in your car, trembling hands on the wheel, you'll notice the scratches across your arms. You'll notice the dirt under your nails. And if you dare to look in the rearview mirror before pulling onto the highway, you just might see something crouched at the edge of the light, swaying, waiting for the next traveler who stops to listen. The rest stop on I-20 eastbound, somewhere between the thinning lights of Abilene and the long black miles toward Weatherford, looks like any other patch of poured concrete and half-dead grass along the Texas highway. By daylight, it is unremarkable, the kind of place families stretch their legs and truckers stretch their backs. But at night, when the sky is wide and the stars look sharp as broken glass, there is something about that place that presses down on the chest. Travelers say they feel watched, even when the lot is empty. They say the air inside the men's restroom is 10 degrees colder than the outside, no matter the season. They say the clock on the wall above the sinks, a cheap plastic thing screwed into cinder block, always shows 2:13 a.m. every morning. The highway maintenance crew resets it, sometimes replacing it altogether. By the following night, the hands slip back as if by magnetic pull, as if time itself obeys a different master within those walls. People laugh about it, tell it like a ghost story, until they have reason to stop there alone. The story, as it is told, begins in 1985. A long-haul driver named Roy Butler pulled his rig off the interstate just before 2 in the morning. He was tired, but too wired from black coffee and Dexedrine to sleep. He headed for the men's room, leaving his headlights on, the big Kenworth idling like a chained beast. What happened next made the local papers, though not many outside Taylor County remember it. He was found face down between the stalls, his skull caved in with the lid of the porcelain tank. There were no fingerprints, no blood trail, nothing to suggest robbery. His wallet was left untouched. The official report noted the time of death, estimated from the cooling of the body and the unfinished cigarette in his hand. 2:13 a.m. No one was ever arrested. The case grew cold, then froze altogether. A few months later, the maintenance man noticed the clock had stopped at the same time. He changed the batteries. It stopped again. He replaced the clock. The next morning it was back at 2:13. He swore in a shaky affidavit that he watched the hands spin backward on their own while he stood there, mop in hand, the sound of scraping metal echoing like laughter. He quit the next week. Locals avoid the place. Even the state troopers use the next rest stop when they can. But there are always the out-of-towners, the night drivers who don't know better, the ones whose bladders or nerves push them to step inside. Some come out pale and silent, saying nothing. Some refuse to go back on the road, shaking until dawn as though they've touched a live wire. A few never come out at all. Ask around Abilene and you will hear stories of cars left in the lot with the engines running, doors hanging open, the drivers gone. Once, in 1998, a Greyhound bus stopped there and 2 passengers failed to reboard. The police combed the place. Dogs sniffed every patch of scrub grass and every drainage ditch. No trace. Only the clock steady as a heart monitor reading 2:13. I heard about it from a man named Calvin, who tended bar at a truck stop lounge just west of Sweetwater. He was an old hand, face furrowed like a dry field, and he liked to scare the younger drivers with talk of haunted highways. But there was something in his voice when he mentioned the frozen clock that lacked the usual grin. He said he had gone in once back in the late 90s, dared by a friend. The air inside felt wrong, he said, like being underwater. He swore the lights flickered, though the bulbs never dimmed. And then he looked in the mirror. He saw himself standing at the sink, only it wasn't himself. The reflection smiled when he wasn't smiling, leaned closer when he held still. Its lips moved, but the glass made no sound. He left, he said, and never went back. His friend didn't laugh afterward. His friend quit driving altogether. I thought it was nothing more than talk, a roadside myth cooked up to keep drivers awake. But last winter, when the wind cut cold across the plains and the road was empty enough to feel like I was the last man alive, I found myself low on gas and lower on nerves. I pulled off at the rest area, the same one. The lot was empty. Sodium lights buzzed overhead, casting the kind of jaundiced glow that makes shadows look like stains. The restroom door groaned when I pushed it open. The smell inside was faintly metallic, as if the walls themselves were rusting from the inside out. And there was the clock, perched above the sinks like an indifferent sentinel. The hands rested neatly on 2:13. My phone said 11:47. I remember the way the numbers didn't seem to match, how my brain refused to believe both could be true. I told myself not to look in the mirror, and of course I did. What I saw still keeps me awake. It was me, yes, but older. Bloated, the skin sagging and gray as if waterlogged. The eyes were glassy, fish dead, but they moved. They fixed on me. My reflection raised its hand slowly, a warning or a greeting, I couldn't tell. My own hand lay rigid at my side, and then its lips moved. I don't know what it said. I bolted, but not before I heard a sound behind me. The scrape of porcelain on tile, heavy and deliberate. I made it back to my car, slammed the door, locked it though I was alone in the lot. I kept the engine running and stared through the windshield at the building. The lights inside flickered then once like a dying candle. When I looked at my phone again, the battery was drained flat, though it had been at 70% when I parked. I drove until my eyes blurred with tears and exhaustion, and I didn't stop until I hit Fort Worth. The next morning, after a few hours of dreamless sleep, I checked the news. No reports, no accidents, nothing at all. Just silence. But I couldn't shake the image of my own reflection, mouthing words across the glass. I couldn't shake the certainty that if I had stayed another moment, I would have heard them clear. People think horror lives in old houses, in creaking attics and graveyards. But out here on the blacktop veins of Texas, horror waits in smaller places in bright tiled rooms under humming lights. It waits where time holds its breath. The clock above the sink still reads 2:13. Tomorrow it will read the same, and someday perhaps you'll pull off for a piss on your way east thinking nothing of it. The lot will be empty. The door will groan. The air will feel colder than it should. And when you wash your hands, if you dare look up, you might see me in the mirror, older still, smiling at last, ready to speak the words that time has been holding back. Highway 180 through Palo Pinto County runs long and flat, a strip of weather-beaten asphalt cutting through dry pasture land and low cedar thickets, with the Brazos River carving its way to the east and the limestone cliffs keeping their silent watch on the west. Folks who drive it often at night will tell you there are stretches where the headlights seem to bend into the darkness, swallowed up quicker than they should, where the air feels heavier, quieter than even midnight ought to be. About 12 miles west of Mineral Wells, just before the road dips toward the old rest stop near Lake Palo Pinto, campers and travelers began telling the same story, sometimes in whispers at the gas stations, sometimes as a warning around campfires. They said if you pulled over at night, especially when the clouds hung low and the wind pushed dry leaves across the pavement, you could hear voices out in the trees. Not people talking, but a song, a hymn low and mournful drifting like smoke through the juniper and oak. The problem was there were no people. No radios, no gatherings, just the faint smell of smoke, as though some fire had long ago burned down to ash and never properly died. I first heard the story from an old man at a bait shop in Gordon. He was skinning a catfish on a stained cutting board, talking more to himself than to me, but I caught every word. He said back in the 30s there had been a church standing near that rest stop, a clapboard chapel built by ranch families who never had money, but always had faith. They came in wagons from miles around, leaving their cattle untended for a Sunday afternoon to sing and pray in the heat. But the church was struck by lightning during a summer storm and the roof went up fast. Nobody knew if it was the lanterns or the dry wood, but before anyone could drag out the hymnals or the old pump organ, the place was gone. What folks didn't like to talk about was that some didn't make it out in time. A choir rehearsal, the children mostly. Voices caught mid-song when the beams came down. The preacher tried to save them and burned with them. After that, people avoided the spot. They built another church down in town, and the road eventually straightened and widened, leaving the scar of the old site tucked behind a stand of cedar trees where travelers pulled over to rest their legs and dump their trash. I didn't believe it at first. These kinds of stories float around every county in Texas, stitched together from tragedy, rumor, and the whiskey-fueled imagination of old-timers who spend too much time remembering. But a month later, I found myself headed west toward Breckenridge with nothing but a duffel bag, and as dusk fell, I saw the faded green sign for the rest stop. My truck's gas gauge was low, and I told myself it wouldn't hurt to pull in, stretch a while, and maybe catch some sleep. The place was nothing more than a cracked loop of asphalt, with two leaning picnic tables under tin shelters. The paint on the trash barrels was long flaked away, and the light poles hadn't worked in years. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I cut the engine and the sudden silence pressed hard against my ears. Out here, you don't realize how much noise a motor makes until it's gone. I leaned against the hood, watching the horizon bleed orange and then purple. That was when I caught it. A sound so faint I thought at first it was wind through the branches. But it rose and dipped, carried on a tune that had no place being out there. A hymn unmistakable. Old words I half recognized from a childhood of reluctant Sundays in church pews. Sweet voices, not sharp or joyful, but slow, drawn out, weighted with sorrow. My first instinct was a practical one. Somebody camping nearby, maybe a group of church folks holding an outdoor revival. I pushed off the truck and followed the sound into the tree line. The cedars closed in quick, their branches clawing my shirt as I moved deeper. The ground dipped toward a hollow, and with each step the song grew clearer. Harmony, children's voices weaving with deeper ones, low men's tones that made my chest tighten. The smell hit me then, faint but unmistakable, the charred sweetness of burned wood. I called out, half embarrassed, half uneasy. My voice cracked through the dark. The singing didn't falter. No answering shout, no rustle of bodies moving. Just that hymn, steady and low. I pushed farther until I stumbled into a clearing. My boot struck something, and when I looked down, I saw a line of blackened stones half sunk into the earth. A foundation, the outline of where walls once stood. The air above it shimmered faintly as though heat still rose, though the night had cooled enough for my breath to show. The hymn ended on a long falling note, and the silence that followed was worse than the song. It filled me up, pressed on my chest, left me aware of my own breathing, too loud, too quick. I whispered hello, my voice trembling. That was when the voices returned, but closer, as though they had moved in around me. A circle. I couldn't place them in any one direction. They weren't singing now, but whispering, layered words tumbling together, too many to catch. I thought I heard my name, though I'd told no one I was coming this way. My skin broke out in a cold sweat. I turned to leave, but the trees seemed closer, the clearing narrower. A shadow crossed the stones, tall and bent, its edges flickering like flame. Then others, smaller shapes crowding beside it. I smelled burning hair, the acrid bite of it, and my stomach lurched. My ears rang with the sudden shriek of voices raised not in song but in a cry, 100 voices drawn out in pain. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, eyes squeezed shut. When I opened them again, I was alone. The clearing was dark, the smell gone, the air still. I didn't run, though every part of me wanted to. I walked slow and stumbling back to the truck, half afraid that running would bring them down on me. When I reached the asphalt, the night was quiet, too quiet. I cranked the ignition, the headlights spilling pale cones across the broken pavement, and as the engine roared to life, I caught one last sound behind me, faint and far but clear as the first. The hymn carried on the air, low and mournful, promising it was not finished. I drove until the gas light blinked and found a station in Breckenridge, too bright, too ordinary. The fluorescent buzz a mercy. I sat in the cab until morning, staring at my hands that still smelled faintly of smoke. I never went back to that rest stop, but I know others have. Every so often you'll hear a new story at a diner or from a deputy on the night shift. Campers pulling over and waking to voices outside their tents. Travelers swearing they smelled a fire that wasn't there. None of them stay long and none of them talk loud. It's always in hushed tones, the way you tell a secret you don't want to believe but can't ignore. What I know is this. Some fires don't go out, not really. Some songs don't end even when the voices are ash. And on Highway 180 in the dark cedar hollows of Palo Pinto County, the choir still sings. Highway 67 between Marfa and Presidio is a long, dark stretch at night. Few gas stations, fewer lights, and once you leave the glow of town, it feels like you've entered another country entirely. Hunters use it often, pulling over at wide gravel shoulders to sleep a few hours before dawn. Their rifles locked in the cab, deer tags tucked in glove compartments, coolers empty and waiting. That night, 4 of them parked their pickups on the side of the road near a patch of scrub brush that rose like a black wall against the desert. They set out folding chairs, drank beer, and let the stillness press down around them. By midnight, the desert was so quiet it felt smothered. Even the crickets had gone silent, and the only sound was the hiss of the occasional 18-wheeler rushing by, the glow of its headlights cutting across the brush before fading into black again. It was close to 2 in the morning when Earl, the oldest of them, leaned forward in his chair, pointing down the pavement. Something was moving across the asphalt. At first, the others thought it was a coyote or a possum, maybe even one of those big desert spiders that can make a grown man's skin crawl. But the shape was wrong. It was low, dragging itself, and it had too many legs. Not just 2 or 4 or 6, but more. Dozens, maybe. They couldn't be sure because the thing didn't move like an animal should. The legs bent in different directions, some scraping against the pavement like sticks, others rising and curling back down with deliberate patience. It wasn't fast. It wasn't hunting. It was just crawling straight across the highway like it had somewhere important to be. The men sat frozen, their beer cans dangling in their hands, the clink of aluminum against metal chairs loud in the stillness. Nobody wanted to move first. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a man's torso, but there was something hateful about the way it pulled itself forward, as if each step was chosen, as if each step was meant to be seen. Its body wasn't fur or scales or even skin. In the faint glow of starlight, it looked like folds of old paper, brittle and wrinkled as if the desert wind might scatter it apart. But those legs were sharp, pointed, insect-like, jutting at strange angles. It reached the middle of the highway and stopped as though it knew the men were watching. Earl, who'd hunted more years than he cared to count, whispered that someone should shine the truck lights on it. Nobody moved. Then Danny, the youngest, nervously flicked his flashlight, aiming the narrow beam across the asphalt. The light hit the thing, and for 1 second they all saw it clearly. Its surface rippled, collapsing inward like flame catching old newspaper. The legs curled inward and the body shriveled, twisting smaller and smaller until it collapsed on itself. Then in the next heartbeat it wasn't there. Not dead, not smashed, not even a stain left behind. It was gone, like a scrap of ash carried away on a breeze, except no breeze stirred. The desert air remained still and hot and suffocating. Nobody spoke for a long while. Danny finally cursed under his breath, insisting it had been some kind of spider, a big one, maybe diseased, maybe mangled by a car earlier. The others didn't argue, but they didn't believe it either. They packed up their chairs and retreated to their trucks, shutting themselves inside with the thin comfort of metal doors. The desert outside felt suddenly full of listening things. Each of them stared through windshields, scanning the darkness for movement, jumping at shadows. None of them slept. By morning, they were hollow-eyed. They drove into Presidio for breakfast at a small diner near the river. When Earl mentioned what they'd seen, the waitress grew pale and crossed herself. She told them she'd heard stories from her grandfather, back when he ran cattle along the border. Things crawling at night, things you didn't talk about because talking gave them power. She said they came when the desert was too dry, when the ground cracked open and let old things through. Hunters and truckers saw them sometimes but pretended they didn't. She said her grandfather called them crawlers, though he never described them. He only said that if your headlights caught one, you mustn't stop to look. Keep driving, keep moving, don't ever let it know you've seen it. Because once you did, it remembered you. The men laughed nervously, chalking it up to old Mexican superstition, desert folklore meant to scare children into staying close to home. But when they went back to their pickups after breakfast, each of them noticed the same thing. Thin streaks of dust across the hoods, not like wind-blown grit but lines. Deliberate tracks, crooked and uneven, as if something with too many legs had dragged itself across the paint in the night, leaving faint marks behind. Earl rubbed at the streak with his palm. The dust smeared, but the line beneath was faintly etched, a hair-thin scratch that hadn't been there the day before. They didn't speak of it again, not to their families, not to each other. But Danny never went hunting along Highway 67 again. 2 years later, his truck was found abandoned near the same stretch of road. Doors locked, keys still inside, the cab filled with deep, parallel scratches running across the seats and dashboard. Danny was gone. No body, no footprints, nothing but the wide desert silence. When they searched the highway, one of the deputies swore he saw something moving in the distance, low and deliberate, crawling on too many legs. When headlights swung over it, it shriveled like paper and blew away. They say you can learn the character of a highway by how it behaves after midnight. Some roads go quiet and respectable, as if the asphalt remembers the church bells and school buses and settles down like a dog on a porch. Others unravel. Highway 36 between Somerville and Brenham has a reputation among the tow drivers and the state boys. A reputation tugged along by the wind that moves the oak branches and rattles the aluminum siding of the rest area, 30 minutes north of the lake. The pavement heaves in a few places where summer heat buckles it, and the reflectors wink like a half-asleep thing. I learned the road during a season of my life when I drove without much intention, just following the line between tail lights and mile markers, letting late-night radio wash over me like my own pulse. I was making house calls as an insurance field investigator, all broken storm gutters and kitchen fires, and one claim with a dead goat that turned out to be a lawsuit. You can forget what you are when the night presses in, and the posts stream by like ribs on a skeleton. I pulled into the Highway 36 rest area the first time for a reason as ordinary as they come. Coffee and a bathroom. The place sits a little below the crown of the highway, a low concrete sprawl with picnic tables, soda machines, and a strip of tired grass, the color of cornflakes. The oak trees on the perimeter look wind-flattened, their bark the gray of elephant hide. The building itself has that state-mandated cleanliness, stainless steel fixtures and sanitizer dispensers, a Texas outline on a sign telling you who paid for it. The lights hum enough to raise the hair on your arms. There are locked bulletin boards with maps fading to pastel, and a wall phone with a sunken keypad like a missing tooth. I remember the smell of it on that first night. Bleach, pine cleaner, and the ozone of aging fluorescent tubes, undercut by the faint musk of wet dust. There were 2 semis idling by the truck lot, and a Charger in the car section with fog on its windows. The air wrapped around me soft and warm. I went in, nodded to nobody, and stood at the sink after, washing my hands while the mirror threw me back at myself. My face looked the way it always did after a long day. Eyelids heavy, The beard a shade too far past needing a trim, dark crescents I told myself were genetic. I looked like a person waiting for permission to sleep. That was all. You check your phone? You think about the next hour on the road? You rub a crick out of your neck. Nothing strange happened. It took me 3 more stops before the thing in the mirror smiled. On the second visit, there was a state trooper nursing a coffee at the machine and a janitor swabbing the men's room with half-annoyed competence. The janitor had the kind of belly that pushes farm shirts into new creases. He whistled a melody that sounded like a hymn with the notes out of order. There were posted flyers about human trafficking with pictures that made my stomach wobble. The third visit was in daytime, sun hard enough to make the white paint on the curb glow. I was not thinking about portals or visions or the dead. I was thinking about the roof damage on a ranch outside Caldwell and whether the owner was lying to me. I stood at the sink and watched soap twist down the drain while a little boy in a Braves cap dragged a paper towel across the counter and left a comet tail of water. The fourth visit was at 2 hats past midnight. The date rolled from July into August while I was on that stretch. The building held the same clean brightness of a dentist office, and the cicadas outside rasped like power tools with dying batteries. I had a sense of entering a church after hours. I stood at the sink and saw myself again. The familiarity of it like a hand on your shoulder. Then very gently like a shadow passing under a streetlight, the face changed. I did not see it change in motion, the way hair blows back in wind. It was as if a film reel jumped and suddenly the frame had different content. I breathed in, saw my chest lift, and the chest in the mirror did not match the timing. My mouth felt dry. I closed my eyes and counted to 3 the way my therapist taught me back when we were still working on breathing through it. When I opened my eyes, I found a man looking back at me whose features had been cut along the same pattern as my skull but starved, stretched, adjusted by unkind light. The cheekbones had risen like stones through winter soil. The skin had a pallor that reminded me of the belly of fish. The eyes sank into bruised hollows. You could have told me it was a trick of the light and I might have agreed just to make you stop talking. I lifted my right hand. He lifted his left, the normal mirror behavior. I tried a smile to break the sharp weirdness of it and watched him not smile. He held his mouth in a line so flat it looked carved. I felt something wet on my wrist and realized the water was still running onto my fingers. In the real room, a hand dryer stuttered on and off like a faulty heartbeat. I took my hands away from the sink, turned, and walked out without drying them. I did not run because you do not run from your own face without feeling ridiculous. At the coffee machine, a woman in scrubs paid for a Coke with change and told me the napkin dispenser was empty. I nodded the way a person nods when they are calculating whether they are going mad. I got into my car and sat, let the air conditioner breathe on me, and told myself the truth I needed in that moment. I was tired. There was fluorescent flicker. There had been stories about this stretch going around long enough to seed images into a sleep-deprived brain. It was nothing, and it would be nothing. I merged, the highway a pewter ribbon under scattered stars. In the side mirror, my taillights lit the stripes. I adjusted the rear view and watched my face an inch tall in the little mirror that hung like an eye under the big one. It was my face, and the muscles remembered, the feel of it, and relaxed. 2 weeks after, that I took a call from my supervisor at a gas station in Chapel Hill. He said I had to go document a vandalism claim at the Highway 36 rest area. I told him rest areas were outside our portfolio. He said the claim was a special case because the janitorial contractor had a liability rider through our firm, and they were trying to get out of a small claims suit. A guy had quit on the spot after allegedly injuring himself in some panic episode, and they were claiming they were not responsible. I said I did not do people, I did roofs and barns. He said, do me a favor. Go take some pictures, ask a question or two, give me a page of notes, we will call it done. I said fine, and that was me agreeing to walk into the place again as if the first time had been a lost friend I was going to find. The contractor met me in the parking lot under the high sun of 4 in the afternoon, a time when shadows keep their distance. He was a man in his 60s with white eyebrows and sun crinkles so deep I wanted to run my fingers along them like plowed rows. He had that tough foreman friendliness that makes you think of stopwatches and checklists. He told me the janitor's name was Ellis and he had only been on the job 2 months. Quit in the middle of his shift one night, left the supply closet open and his cart half turned around like he was going to finish. He'd cut his forearm on something when he fell. The contractor said it happened in the men's room, because of course it had. And when I asked what Ellis claimed, the man cleared his throat and put the back of his hand to his mouth in a reluctant little cough. He said the mirror smiled at him when he wasn't smiling, he said, with the same tone with which you describe a teenager refusing school. Said he saw someone wasn't him. Boy wasn't right since his divorce. I gave him the number for HR and told him he had my sympathy. He told me, sir, it smiled like it knew me. Then he got white in the face and said he smelled rain that wasn't there. We walked inside and the air changed from bread oven to refrigerated truck. In the men's room, the contractor held the stainless trash lid open with his foot and pointed at a smear of dried brown that caught under the lip like a thumbprint. The paper towel dispenser would not stop creeping its last sheet down like a tongue. On the mirror, there were 2 pale streaks that formed an X, where someone had half-heartedly tried to wipe it and then given up. I stepped to the same sink as before because you cannot help repeating superstitions, and I could feel my heartbeat in my gums. The mirror gave me back my own features, normal as milk. I stood there longer than a person would who is checking for cracks. I raised my right hand and the reflected one lifted left. I made an expression I never make in public, a theatrical grimace with my tongue against my cheek. The mirror did what mirrors do. I turned to the contractor and opened my mouth. The words did not announce themselves to me. They were waiting already formed, like a bad idea you tell yourself is wisdom. Do you ever catch yourself doing something you don't remember deciding to do? I asked him. Like you find yourself standing in a doorway with a broom and forget the first step that led there. The contractor looked at me as if I had offered him a hand with a moth crushed in the palm. He shifted weight and scratched his collarbone through his shirt and said he had work. He left me in the bathroom with the humming lights and the cameras in the corners that pretend to be deterrents. That night I dreamed in a way I had not dreamed since childhood, with the dreams leaving behind the sticky veil that makes your eyelids feel like gauze. The dream took place in the rest area. I stood at the mirror and watched my face breathe without me. The air in the dream smelled like rain even though the floor was dry. That wet concrete smell that wraps around you in August when the field next to the highway darkens and the frogs start calling before the first drops have fallen. There was a figure behind me in the dream that I could see in the mirror but not feel in the room, the outline of a man whose clothes hung like flags after a storm. He was the absence of light gathered into human shape. When I woke, I carried his outline back with me, the way a person who has spent all day in a boat still feels the hull lift when they are in bed at night. I decided without deciding to go back, the way some people call an old number just to hear it ring, because the ring tells them the world is held together by wires and switches. It was fully night when I pulled in. The truck lot was a glare field of running lights and chrome. The car lot was not empty, but it felt empty. The air was wet without a storm. I walked into the men's room and saw a kid washing his hands like he was auditioning for a hygiene poster. A baseball teen with a haircut you could set your watch to, and a mother telling him to hurry. My eyes found my sink the way a tongue finds the sore spot. I let the cold water run. I leaned toward the mirror until my breath smudged it. There is a moment in a stare when the muscles around your eyes slacken, and your face stops looking human to you. It becomes image, the way a photograph of your father sometimes shows you a stranger he resembled, but never met. I held my own eyes and waited until I felt that slide. Then I saw him again. His face was mine with the wrong biography worn into it. The corners of his mouth were bruised with restraint. He stared the way a man stares when he is counting the teeth on a saw. I felt a flinch run down my arms, and the water turned the basin into a dull bell every time it struck. The kid laughed behind me, and the sound came to me from a distance, thin, like a mockingbird imitating a telephone ring. I said hello. I said it under my breath, but I said it with the intention of talking to the person behind the glass the way you call to livestock through a fence. The mouth in the mirror did not move. The eyes in the mirror did the smallest thing. It is hard to describe without sounding delicate and insane. They widened a fraction from the bottoms, the pupils bowing down, the whites showing just a sliver more under the irises. I felt my bladder give a coward's twitch. I said, "Can you hear me?" I did not know if I wanted it to answer. The lights in the bathroom crackled the way lights do when the ballast is tired. I saw for one breath something beyond the mirror, not reflected behind me, behind him. The way you can sometimes recognize the texture of a hotel room in a video shot on a bad phone camera. The tiles behind his head were not our tiles. Ours were smooth and white with a fine grout line like a ruled page. His were variegated, a darker stone like you might see in a motel lobby that wants to look expensive. The light where he stood had a sickly warmth. I saw what looked like a hand press against the glass from his side, not where my hand was, a hand that left an oil print the way a car window holds onto touch. The palm was long, the fingers too jointed, and the angle showed it belonged to someone standing just out of the frame. I stepped backwards and hit the paper towel dispenser with my elbow. The kid squealed with laughter like it was a game. His mother shot me a look that communicated every necessary judgment. I left without drying again and did not get coffee this time. I sat in the car and rubbed my temples and told myself a new truth to hold off the other one. That a mind can pitch itself off the usual path and still return, because we are elastic creatures. We are not brittle unless we decide to be. The sky over Brenham was bruised by town lights. Far off, an ambulance painted the night with white. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, and it was a number I did not recognize. I answered because I needed an excuse to hear a human voice and not my own blood. The man on the line introduced himself in a voice that wore itself out at the edges. He said his name was Ellis. He had gotten my number from the contractor who had told him I had asked questions on his behalf. He said he did not give me permission to use his name, but if I wanted to know what happened, he would tell me once as payment for asking with a tone that didn't assume he was crazy. We met the next
evening at a Whataburger on the edge of town where the lot
floods if it rains hard enough because the gutter behind the dumpsters has sunk. Ellis was younger than I pictured. Late 30s, the kind of tired that looks like it was applied with careful brushwork. He drank his soda like a man making a deal with himself. He told me in a soft, flat way that both his parents were dead, and his wife had left him 2 years ago to go to her sister in Sherman, that he didn't have much but his one bedroom off Old Independence Road with the roof that cried even when it wasn't raining. He had taken the janitor job because the hours suited a person who didn't want to see people. It was fine, he said, until one night in June when he saw the mirror do something a mirror wasn't meant to do. He said he had been mopping the men's room floor at about 3 in the morning. He said the song in his head was a commercial jingle that wouldn't die. He said he straightened and stretched his back and looked up and saw someone with his face standing still in the mirror like a painting, hands loose at his sides, eyes so tired they had turned into a second shadow. He did what I did. He opened his mouth to smile and the man did not. Ellis lifted his hand and the man lifted the wrong one, the right one instead of the left. Then the other shadows moved around the man like something behind him had shifted. He heard, Ellis said, rain on the mirror. Not rain in the room. The metallic hiss of it on glass. The lights flickered. He swore to me quietly. A shape passed behind his reflection, tall and wrong, like a person who had been stretched in a silo. It leaned toward him. He said he smelled the first drops on hot dirt smell like the whole field had exhaled. He said he flinched and the mop handle slipped and bit his forearm open. He said he wrapped it with paper towels and walked out and didn't come back. 10 minutes after he left, he was sitting outside the Exxon on 36, crying into the steering wheel, because his body did not know what else to do. I asked him if he had ever seen something like it before. He said no. He said he had seen deer out of season in places that did not fit their hooves. He said he once woke up with mud on his heels and a grain of something in his eye that could have been sand or bone. He said the mirror thing was new. I asked him if he thought it was trying to talk to him. He looked at me with a kind of compassion I had not earned, and said it already had talked to me and that my voice sounded familiar enough that I had followed it back to the room to see for myself. I asked what he meant. He said, "You went back." I can tell you did. The sentence carried the weight of a priest remarking on the smell of smoke and hair. I should have left it alone. That is the sentence I heard in my head as I drove. And it is the sentence I heard an hour later when I parked again at the rest area because I wanted to measure something against its own dimensions. Night had folded down on the building. The oak leaves by the picnic tables were still. The vending machine hummed like a hive. The men's room was empty. I stood at the sink and told myself this was the last time. That is another sentence liars tell themselves in good faith. I turned the faucet off because the sound of water would encourage me to believe in poetry. I smoothed the front of my shirt. I looked into the mirror and did the thing with the slackened stare. He was there at once, like a fish rising to the surface of a pond, slow and inevitable. His eyes were my eyes from an age I had not reached, full of a resignation like a thumb pressed into clay. His mouth opened. Not wide, just the smallest parting, as if he had remembered how to move lips. The sound that came through was not a voice. It was the sound of wind when it falls against glass and wants in. The shape behind him leaned. I could see more of the room behind him now. The tiles that were not ours. A darkness in the corner where a hand dryer should have been. The corner of a doorway that was not at the same angle as ours. I smelled rain. The hair on my forearms lifted at once. I said no out loud, a stupid thing to say to a mirror. The mouth in the glass kept going. It formed the shape my name makes. I could see it on his lips. The way the first letter blunts the lower lip for a second. I heard a whisper that could have been a draft or the voice of a person I knew from childhood calling, from the end of a hallway. I stepped closer. The skin on my cheeks prickled as the glass cooled it. He raised his hand then, and it was not the mirror image of mine. He lifted his right at the same time I lifted my right, the way two people on the same side of a window might move. His fingertips touched the glass, and I heard from his side the lightest patter like drops beginning on a windshield. My own fingers reached without permission. When my skin met the mirror, cold shot into the bones in a way that wasn't temperature, more like a code being keyed into marrow. The lights flickered. The sound of rain grew. Behind me, the men's room was silent, but in the mirror it started to drizzle down the surface of the other side. I saw the place where our fingertips met bead with moisture. My stomach clenched down hard enough to make my knees go light. I tried to pull my hand back and found that the cold held it like glue, not grabbing, just refusing to release. I set my feet, leaned back, and felt the resistance as a presence rather than a material. On the other side, he leaned forward, his face coming close enough that his eyes filled my whole view, and all the bruised tiredness in them made me feel like I had failed him somehow. The shape behind him stepped closer. It unfolded. It was no more than a taller man, if you wanted to be merciful in your description. But its neck was too long, and its shoulders sloped like a coat hung on a nail. It placed its hand on his shoulder, and the way its fingers bent suggested more joints than we get. I yanked back. The cold let go the way a mouth lets go of a straw when the drink is gone. I stumbled. My shoulder hit the edge of the sink. Pain snapped me into a different part of myself. I raised my other hand and slammed the heel of it against the glass in a foolish attempt to shatter the thing. The mirror did not break. It trembled. For one crystalline second, the surface was not flat. It bowed. It held the shape of my palm and then smoothed itself again like a pond defying physics. He did not flinch. The tall thing did not turn. The rain sound ceased. He pressed his own palm to the glass right where mine had been, and left behind a handprint like frost. Somewhere outside, an engine revved. Somewhere in the building, a paper towel roll fell inside its cabinet and made a hollow drum sound. I left the room with my hands hot and my mouth tasting like pennies. I went out into the dark that felt kinder than the light, and stood under the oak that had a lightning scar in its bark. The air had gone still. I looked at the night sky the way a man looks at a ceiling trying to remember a song. I told myself again that I would never go back, and then I told myself to get my notes in order for the claim, because documentation is the handhold you find on the outside of a burning building. I submitted the report with the facts as a person in my trade understands them. A worker quit after a frightening event. He suffered a minor injury. The contractor was not responsible. The mirror had no visible damage indicating defects. The lighting flickered and should be inspected. I was sober, and my new soberness resisted the urge to attach a second document where I wrote down what I had seen. My supervisor texted a thumbs up and a note about a hail claim in Waco. I drove home and tried to eat a bowl of cereal, and found my hand would not carry the spoon all the way to my mouth without trembling. I slept the way a dog sleeps during fireworks. This is the part I have put off telling. It is the part you might have sensed was coming, like you sense rain hours before the forecast catches up. A week later, I woke in the dark of my apartment at an hour that feels raw and wrong. And I knew with the same certainty one knows one's own name that I needed to go to the rest area. Not wanted, needed. The word packed a compulsion into it that made me reach for the keys without first standing fully. I could have fought it. I could have called Ellis and told him to talk me down. I could have gone to the ER and waited for dawn while a nurse took my vitals and put my shaking on a form. I did not. I drove. The highway unfolded under me like the tongue of a thing that wanted me swallowed. The oak silhouettes stood along the road like ushers at a funeral. The building was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of human contamination. The air in it held itself the way a held breath does. I walked past the vending machines, past the bulletin board with the map of Washington County, past the wall phone with the missing tooth keypad. I pushed the men's room door open with 3 fingers as if the extra 2 might matter. The light flickered, gathered, and held. I took my place at the sink as a man might take his old seat at a kitchen table to eat a meal he had eaten every night of his marriage. The mirror showed me what a mirror shows. I let my face empty of expression. He came quickly now, as if I had taught the trick, and he appreciated the efficiency. He looked worse than before. Not angry, not evil. More eroded, as if he had been left in wind and his soft structures had worn down. His hair lay flat against his head like wet fur. The hollows under his eyes had deepened until the lids looked too heavy to lift. His mouth twitched on one side. The tall thing stood behind him now, with its hand there always, a claim staked by touch. I could see the room behind him better, and the floor was darker in blotches, the kind of dark that comes when water lives in a concrete that should not hold it. The smell of rain came stronger. I do not know where I found the courage or the foolishness, but I said out loud what had been living as a truth in the back of my throat. If you want me, take me. Give him back. I did not know who him was, except that I meant the man who had worn my face before this exchange started, the one who carried all my tiredness and love for sugar, and the way I liked to rest my hand on the window at stoplights to feel the pain cool my pulse. The lights went out, not flicker. Out. The black that filled the men's room was full enough that I could feel it, the way you feel lake water when you jump in before dawn and come up with moss against your mouth. In that black, I felt a pressure on my right hand the way you feel a pressure when a cat steps onto your chest. There was the sensation of palm meeting palm, but from inside the hand, my nerves lifting, the tendons bowing like I had laced my fingers with someone, then wet, cold, and alive. The lights came back tinged yellow. My right hand was on the glass, though I did not remember lifting it. On the other side, so was his. Our palms matched as if poured into one mold. The tall thing moved. It slid along him and then around him in a motion that defied joints, and then it laid the flat of its too many knuckles against the back of his hand. My bones sang. I do not mean that poetically. I mean I heard a frequency the way a tuning fork sings when it has been struck. Felt along a column of bone from finger to skull. I watched my face in the mirror open its mouth. The smile that had frightened the janitor arrived like a long-planned visitor. Precise, wrong, slow. My teeth showed. In the real room, my lips were closed. In the mirror, my lips were peeled back from my gums like something had rearranged my muscles the way you rearrange furniture to make a room look bigger for a showing. The smile held. It was all gums and shorelines and had the gravity of a ritual. The tall thing let go and the lights went out a second time, and in that second I knew it was too late to pull back. I yanked anyway, and my shoulder tore with a noise I recognized as a small injury rather than a large one. The sound denim makes when it gives it the knee. I staggered backwards into the stall door. The lights returned. The mirror showed me alone, my face white as chalk, my reflection moving in time with me again. You will want to know how it ends. There is an ending, and I carry it with me now like a seed I swallowed. When I left that night and stepped into my car, I set the mirror for the highway and settled my hands at 10 and 2 and saw, in the rear view and in the small tilting mirror beneath it, a stranger sit up in the back seat and smile at me with my own teeth. He was as gaunt and hollow-eyed as the man I had been watching through glass, and the smile on him held the heavy wrongness of something learned, not innate. I turned, quick and stupid, and saw the empty back seat, fast food bag, and an old surveyor's clipboard. When I looked forward again, my hands were holding tight to the wheel, but the skin on them was not mine. That is dramatic and untrue. The skin was mine as it will always be mine. What was different was the way it felt from the inside. The arrangement had been reversed. At home, my bathroom mirror showed me a face that lined up with my bones and moved with me a perfect fraction. When I smiled, it smiled. When I slept, I dreamed of rain that never began and of a room with dark stone tiles and of a tall creature who soothed men the way you soothe horses, with a steady hand and the promise of work. I went about my days and filed my paperwork and visited roofs and barns, and once visited a refrigerator that had burned down a kitchen. The world accepted me, because the world is courteous in its apathy. This morning, though, at a stop on the way to Caldwell, I caught my reflection in the window of a darkened barbershop on Main Street in Brenham, and saw in the glass not the man everyone saw when they turned their heads, but the gaunt, hollow-eyed watcher behind the surface, smiling as if he had finally gotten somewhere dry after a long walk in a rain that would not decide to fall. He lifted his hand to wave a moment late. I did not wave back. I walked to my car and drove to Highway 36 and past the rest area without turning in. I do not stop on that stretch anymore. I lower the visor so the rear view is a rectangle of tan that shows me nothing. I keep my speed at a steady 65 and count fence posts until the town lights begin to bruise the sky and then bleach it. People call me by my name and their mouths shape it easily. I smile the correct amount for a normal man. If a mirror catches me unawares, I look at it only long enough to tell the story that needs telling. A simple one about light and angles and the human mind. Sometimes at night, if I stand in my kitchen with the refrigerator door open for the cold and I catch my face in the reflection of the black glass of the microwave, I see something move with me a hair late. It is not always so, which is worse that it is not always so. The tall thing visits in dreams and stands behind me with its hand a weight that keeps me steady, the way a father's hand keeps a boy from falling into a creek. I smell rain. I never hear it fall. When I think of Ellis, I imagine him catching sight of himself in the window at the Exxon around 3 a.m. and choosing to look away quick enough that the thing behind him never has time to smile. I tell myself that is kindness. Then at a red light on the edge of town under a sky just beginning to change, I see in the rear view for 1 inch of a second a face in the back seat that watches me, the way a stranger watches you from a mirror. And I know the rest area is still waiting in its hollow, with the trucks idling and the towels creeping out of their dispensers, and the stainless steel glowing under electric light. And that somewhere on the other side of the glass a man is washing his hands with water that smells like metal, while something behind him lays its palm on his shoulder and asks him to smile. I was hauling a trailer full of busted refrigerators out of Abilene, headed for a recycler in Lubbock, when the windmills went still, and the sky took on that yellowed shine like old paper. Out there on 84, the world thins in a way that makes a man hear his own engine, as if it were the only machine left beating. Mesquite and scrub cedar line the highway like a ragged procession, cotton fields lying flat to the horizon, the wind farm blades fixed against the stars as if God had said enough for now. I had made Sweetwater before sundown, fueled up, grabbed burnt coffee and told myself I'd push another couple of hours. The dispatcher wanted the load under the lights by morning. I was trying not to think about my father, who had run wrecker on these roads for 30 years and slit his life open on a night not unlike this one. The official report said heart attack, pulled over near a windbreak to rest, never started back up, but the way my mother told it, there was more to it. He had a way of looking at trees when we drove this stretch, like he was guilty of something and waiting for the sentence. Just past Roscoe, where 84 braids with I-20 and then breaks free again, the radio went to white hiss and the coffee turned on my stomach. The dash lights guttered, flicked, and settled. I could have stopped in Slayton, maybe taken a room near the grain elevators and the bar that still pours Pearl and Lone Star. Instead, the yellow in the sky deepened, like sunflowers under a storm, and the wind came up from the south smelling like lake mud and hot wire. That was when I saw the car. It sat on the shoulder facing the wrong way, a little silver hatchback with its hazards pulsing faint and desperate. Driver's door open, headlights off as if the battery had finally given up. A tire hung in ragged ribbons. No other traffic, just the long unspooling of blacktop and the hedgerow of trees that farmers plant to keep soil from running off. A stitched line of shelter that out here always looks like a gathering. I pulled in behind and eased the truck to a halt. My trailer creaked. The windmills on the ridgeline stood like sentries who had stepped down from guard. When I killed my engine, the quiet came on like a blanket, but it wasn't quiet. It was full of something. You know how mosquitoes sound right at your ear? It was like that. A whispering that wasn't language but wanted to be. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down. Gravel popped under my boots. The night was warm and the smell of creosote and diesel wrapped around the broken hatchback like an old coat. Nobody in the driver's seat. I called out. I did the thing you do on Texas shoulders, which is announce yourself. Talk about the weather. Say your name like it might open a door. I walked around the front of the car and pointed the light toward the ditch and the trees beyond. The beam hit the tangle of branches and died there like light does when it meets the living green, soaking in, turning everything gray and flat. Something moved and my pulse went stupid. Something else moved higher up. I felt watched in a way that's hard to describe without sounding twitchy and foolish. There was a sound like dry husks rubbing together and then a flutter, and the beam of my light caught a shape that sprang from one limb to another. It wasn't a raccoon. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't anything I knew. I did what the truckers say not to do. I lifted the light and cast it across the canopy. Eyes looked back. Not one pair or three, but a lot. The beam crossed and the eyes shifted away, the way animals do, but these were set in places that didn't make sense. Some too close together, some too far apart. Some low like a coyote would be, and some high up where the branches thinned, staring from angles where nothing with weight could perch. The whispering rose and changed, like when a crowd moves in a stadium. I thought of the way my father's hands would twist the steering wheel when we crossed this line of highway. Knuckles white, radio off. Windows up even in August, ma'am, I called, feeling stupid for gendering whoever had been in the car. But old habits are hard to break. Sir, I tried a little louder. You okay down there? I kept my light away from those eyes and ran it along the ditch. I saw a scrap of hoodie, a paper cup, a paperback book torn across the spine. In the mud there were tracks, but not boot and not bare. Toes like hooks. I went numb in my forearms the way you do when a dentist hits the wrong nerve. I took a breath and tried to remember what that old man had said back at the Sweetwater Pump Island. His cap stained where sweat had eaten through. The way he had glanced past my shoulder at the line of trees as if they were customers and he was on shift. Don't stop by the windbreak past County Road 152 if you can help it. If you do, don't shine your light in. The quiet changed as if the night itself had shifted to make room. From the trees came a voice. It wasn't language, and then it was, "Help me," it said. It was a woman's voice, crushed flat by distance or strangled by branches. My legs moved. I lowered into the ditch and the dirt gave under my boots as if the ground were more recently disturbed than it looked. The smell shifted to wet earth and something like copper pennies in a sweaty palm. The beam of my light trembled along the brush and caught a hand. It was not a trick. It was a hand, smallish, palm up, near the gnarled root of the center tree where the windbreak thickened. A bracelet glinted. The fingers moved, curled, and beckoned. It would be a different story if I had called 911 and sat in my truck with the doors locked and the hazards blinking. But nobody comes fast out there. And the voice was human, and the hand was human, and my father had taught me better than to make a prayer out of someone else's pain. I stepped forward. The mud was surprisingly warm. The whispering rose in pitch like a kettle. A shape ran along the limb above, and I felt grit fall into my hair. I reached out and touched the hand. It seized mine with a strength that bit down to the bone. I said, "I've got you," and leaned back, bracing my boots, feeling the pull of something below the roots. It felt like pulling someone out of the backseat of a car that's upside down in water. The hand climbed my wrist without a second hand attached, and for a second, I thought the impossible thing before my fingers found the slick of an arm. In the beam of the light, I saw the face. There are faces that live in your head whether you invite them or not. Hers had the thin look that comes from living too fast and too long on WEC cereal and gas station taquitos. Early 20s, maybe. Freckles across the nose so light you almost missed them. A healing split at the lip. Eyes as green as a broken Lone Star bottle. Those eyes were set with a focus I have only seen in a man at the edge of a ledge who has truly counted the distance. She said it again, "Help me." Then she said, "They're not going to let me go." The branch above us sagged and the whispering changed to something like laughter, and the hand I was holding jerked hard. I kept my stance and pulled, felt the suction, felt the give, and a foot came free, then a knee. Then the rest of her came out like a root that has grown around a pipe. Her jeans were dark and wet with a slurry that wasn't just mud. There were round marks on her calf like something had kissed her there and left perfect circles. The bracelet was braided leather and something metal. I put an arm around her and tried to haul her up the ditch to the shoulder. My mind went simple, a checklist of weight and angle. The trailer's flashlight beam marking the world we needed to make it back to. She leaned on me. Her breath came in ragged draws. She was light, too light for her height. Behind us, the trees moved. I say that and I know trees move in wind, I'm not a fool. But wind moves trees together like a crowd, and this was a different motion. A relay of intention that passed from trunk to trunk. Shapes shifted along the limbs, and once, clearly a hand like a child's, but too long at the fingers reached down and grazed the air where her hair had just been. The eyes above us tracked in pairs and in triples and in singles like fish under a dock. I didn't lift my light into them. I hauled her up and over the slick mud, got her onto the shoulder gravel, felt the safety of grit under our boots like dry bread in a starving mouth. The whispering receded a notch. She clutched my shirt and said, "We need to go right now." I agreed. We made it to my truck and I got her into the passenger seat. She curled around herself and shook while I killed the hazards on her car, because the laws of the open road still applied in my head, and I could already see the sheriff writing me up for leaving a blink-broke vehicle in a kill spot. I should have left it. The yellow in the sky had deepened, turned to something almost green at the horizon, and the radio picked up a station I didn't know, just organ music and a sermon, in a voice like dust. I climbed back up and she grabbed my wrist and said, "Don't turn the key yet." "They don't like the sound," she said. "They listen for it." Her voice was parched. I handed her my coffee thermos and she took a swallow like someone who had forgotten what fluid feels like in the throat. She asked my name and I told her. She told me hers. Lynn. I asked where she was headed and she said Lubbock, but not to go through Ransom Canyon. I said I wasn't going that way anyway. She asked if I was alone and I nodded, and then she said I could push the key now. I did, and the engine caught, and for a second I thought we had pulled off something simple and beautiful, like you do sometimes on a dark highway, where strangeness is always just a lane away. Then the sound happened. It was the sound of a hand sliding along the ribbed metal of the trailer side. It started near the rear and moved forward fast, a patter like running fingers, too many fingers, maybe 20 hands, maybe something else. I eased the steering wheel, felt fear slick my neck, told myself road noise is a liar. Lynn froze. Her eyes were on the side mirror. I looked because you always look even though you know better. In the mirror I saw the hedge dark line and my trailer, and the glow of my own hazard on her abandoned hatchback, and a ripple along the trees like a school of something pacing us. And then the eyes dropped out of the branches and became lights in the ditch, keeping up with the cab like joggers. I put my foot into it. The truck heaved. The whispering rose and fell in waves, and my father's face came back to me in a way that felt like a punch to the sternum. He had told me when I was 12 about the dairy truck that rolled into a culvert, near Post, about the kids who stole their father's sedan and hit a windbreak at 80, about a man who stopped for a hitchhiker near Justisburg and drove into a line of trees and woke up to find his passenger gone. He had told me that some places keep counts, that they take a tithe. He had said the windbreaks take was different. They want you to invite them, he said. They want you to lean into the green. He said this with a look on his face like he was confessing to a priest who didn't want to hear it. Then he changed the station and sang along to Willie Nelson and wouldn't take questions. After he died, my mother told me to avoid that line between Sweetwater and the county line after dark. I didn't listen, because men like me don't listen until the day comes when we have to. We reached a stretch where the hedgerow broke to stubble. The whispering dulled. The eyes fell back. Lynn breathed for the first time in minutes and cried without making any sound. I did 70 through a place where the posted said 60, and no one pulled me over because the only law out there after midnight belongs to what can move through branches. By the time we saw the lights of Slayton, she had fallen asleep with her hand resting on my thigh, like a child might do with a parent in a dark theater. I pulled into the lot of a diner that still had neon in the window and wrote the time on a paper napkin out of some impulse to mark the world as real. I asked if she wanted to sit at a booth and she said no, not around windows. I respected that. I bought 2 breakfast plates to go. The waitress asked where we were headed and I said Lubbock. She nodded like there was a repeatable concept inside the word and handed me the bags. When I got back to the truck, Lynn was awake and watching the trees along the far edge of the parking lot. There weren't many there, just a couple of cottonwoods and a Bradford pear sick with blight, but her gaze treated them like a crowd. We ate in the cab. She told me about how she had left Abilene on a whim to see a boy who lived near the campus and how her back tire felt like it breathed out, and then the car slewed, and she guided it to the shoulder, and how the night had stepped, closer in that abrupt way it does when the engine dies. She told me how she heard voices. She said they sounded like her aunt and like a pastor she had had as a kid, and like the boy she had been going to see. She said she heard her name, and the sound pulled her down the ditch, and she thought she saw someone tangled in the roots, a child maybe, and she reached in, and then there were many hands and the tree itself felt soft inside. I told her I believed her. I said it like a plumber saying a pipe is leaking. I thought about calling the sheriff anyway, but the thought of a uniformed man telling this girl to write a statement under parking lot fluorescence while the whispering waited at the edge of the light made me feel sick. I told her I would take her all the way to Lubbock if that's what she wanted. She nodded and asked me if we could go a back way that avoided water. I said sure, because avoiding water is easy out there unless it rains and fills the playa lakes. We got back on 84. The road felt almost friendly in the short stretch between town lights. She slept again and I drove, and the white lines flicked under, and the old radio found a station out of Clovis that played a song my father loved. I sang along without meaning to, and then I felt the change. It came like a temperature drop inside the cab. The glass fogged at the edges. I wiped a circle with my palm, and the damp had a smell to it like green wood rotting. Lynn stirred. She said her name once, and I understood she wasn't calling to me. I looked in the rear view. The eyes were back. Not outside this time. It is a foolish thing to say, but I know what I saw. The reflective film that makes taillights halo came alive with little pupils that blinked, and there were faces in the sheen of the steel on the trailer. Pressed outward from inside the metal the way heat makes paint bubble, the whispering rose around us, and now I could hear words. They were not a single voice. They were a layered thing like cheap choir. They said, "Come back." They said names. I could pick out a few. There was a man named Abram. There was a woman who answered to Mary, or maybe Maria. There was my father. I pulled onto the shoulder on a stretch with no windbreak and put my face in my hands and told myself, air is air, and mechanics are mechanics, and nothing can get into your trailer from the roadside. When I looked up, I saw a thing that undid me. It was the bracelet, braided leather and a metal charm that might have been an angel wing. It lay on my dash where the little paper napkin with the time on it was living. Lynn had been wearing it. She saw it too. She touched her wrist and then touched the bracelet and made a sound like someone realizing that the door they are opening is wrong. I said, "Where did that come from?" And she said, "They know your hands now." That didn't make sense. She said, "They know you're a puller." That did. My father had been a puller. He had pulled people out of wrecks and ditches and culverts. He had learned a certain angle of leverage. He had taught me some of that. It puts a shape into the use of your body that others can see if they know to look. The thing in the trees knew. That was the moment I understood that what I had done at the ditch had not been escape. It had been invitation. We made Lubbock before 3. The campus was dark, and the big lighted Buddy Holly glasses over by the theater looked silly and sad in that way tourist features do after midnight. I took Lynn to a motel near Avenue Q that had exterior doors like the ones my father hated because they let anything be near you while you slept. She said she could only go inside if I promised not to leave right away. I could have refused because I had a load to deliver and a company that expected me to be a machine. But I have a missing gear where people like her are concerned. I told her I would sit in the chair by the window until the sun started to rise. She went into the bathroom, left the door cracked, and I could hear the shower. "Water makes the whispering stop," she called. And I knew she was wrong, but I didn't say it. The faucet ran. The motel air conditioner groaned. Cars hissed on cue. My eyes drifted. The chair under me felt like the ones in hospital waiting rooms where time flattens. I must have dozed. I woke to glass tapping. My first thought was that it was rain, and I felt ridiculous relief because rain puts a limit on certain things. But the sky through the thin drape was clear. The tapping was a fingernail on glass. Not one fingernail. Many. I stood and the carpet made that sticky pull at my boots like something trying to hold me back. I parted the drape with 2 fingers and put my eye to the slice and looked out across the parking lot to the lone tree that had no business growing there. A cottonwood stunted by exhaust and salt. It was full. It was a hive. It was a chandelier of watching. The whispering flowed through the glass as if the cheap pain were a sieve. Names again, and offers, and prayers said backward. The faces among the leaves were not faces. They were the idea of faces, like someone had seen a face once and tried to make more out of memory. A long arm reached down from the highest limb and pointed at the door of our room. I put my hand against the window and it trembled in a way that did not come from the air conditioner. Lynn stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel. Her eyes were clearer. She saw me at the window, and then she saw the shape of the arm and the way the branches leaned as if being pushed from the far side. She said, "They found us." I said, "They followed me." She shook her head and said, "They always do once you hear them right." She went to the door and I grabbed her elbow, and we stood like that for a second, like a couple in a picture that looks staged until you notice the bruise. She said that if we left by the balcony and took the stairs at the far end, we could make it to the truck without passing under the tree. I told her I wasn't sure that mattered anymore. I don't remember opening the door. I remember the sound of the latch and the way the night air hit us, and the smell of the cottonwood's damp breath. We moved along the balcony. The rail was gritty with dust. Below, the lot was empty but for my rig and a couple of cars that looked abandoned. The whispering pulsed like tide. I felt eyes on me from places where eyes couldn't be, from the corrugations of the aluminum siding, from the vent of the ice machine, from the drain hole in the balcony floor. We made the stairs and descended, and the moment the soles of our boots hit the slab under the cottonwood, the shadow shook itself as if pleased. The long arm reached. It didn't touch. It pointed, not at Lynn, at me. It was not a sudden realization. It was like the way dawn comes in December, slow and without joy. The thing in the trees did not want her. It had already had her, or it had marked her to carry its invitation onward. It wanted me because I had pulled against it, and it wanted the set of my shoulders and the strength in my hands. It wanted my father and could not get him fully, so it would take me. The thought came clean and cruel and true. I told Lynn to run to the truck. She did. The cab door slammed. The tree leaned a fraction and the whispering laughed. I stood under it, and it made a noise like a sigh that wasn't relief but satisfaction. I said, "Do you want me?" The arm lowered. A hand opened. If you've never seen a hand made out of wood and something else, I can tell you it looks almost funny until you notice the nails are not nails. They are small articulated tips, like the legs of stone crickets. The hand waited. I did what I should not have done. I reached up and took it. It was warm. It did not yank. It did not have to. The first pull was gentle, the way a father pulls a child up onto a porch step. My feet left the concrete. The whispering rose in a cheer, not loud but filled with agreement. I thought of my mother. I thought of my father's funeral and the way the wind leaned his hat. I thought of the fridge guts in my trailer and how they would never make it to a scale in Lubbock, and I knew that none of that was the point. The point was hunger that had learned patience, a thing that had found that men who tug against the world are the sweetest to pull. My ribs brushed bark and I smelled sap and rot, and under that a clean mineral smell like the one you get when you crack a stone. My hand went numb. The mouths opened in the leaves around me, and I saw teeth like seed hulls. I heard my father say my name from somewhere deep in the trunk where rings mark off rain that never fell. Here's the part I don't say when people ask why I avoid that stretch of highway. Because I do sometimes still talk with the living, and I have learned there are pieces of truth that work like glass. I let go. I let go and I fell back onto the slab, and my shoulders sang and the world flared white and then corrected to night again. The whispers took on a note I had not heard, thin and surprised. The long arm drew back like someone burned. I rolled and scrambled and made for the truck and threw myself up into the cab and slammed the door, and I could feel the tremor in the frame as the thing in the tree reached for the metal and let go and reached and let go. Lynn had the engine running. She had learned that part. She put the truck in gear and we tore out of there, and the rig almost jackknifed, and then it straightened, and we were on Q, and then we were on 84, and then we were on the open line where the trees give out and the fields lay naked, and the radio caught a song about going home. The sun coming up over the caprock is not kinder than night. It just makes the terms clear. The windmills woke one by one and began to turn. Not because of us, but because that is what they do when the wind comes right. In daylight, the windbreaks look like plain old rows of trees again. You can drive past and never know. I dropped Lynn at a house near 34th, where a boy stood on the porch with his hat off and tears in his eyes and a bruise on his cheek. I thought about telling him to be better. That would have been simple. Instead, I said to Lynn, "If you ever hear it again, don't go in." She said, "You will hear it now," and she was right. It has been years. I moved farther east. I take different jobs. I have learned the sound of whispering in my sleep, and how it comes not just at night but in the clatter of leaves across a parking lot in spring, or the way cotton lint lifts off a field when a truck barrels past. I do not shine lights into trees. I keep my windows up on that stretch, and I talk to my father out loud and ask him if he knew what he was letting touch him on the night he stopped to rest, and he never answers in any way I can take to a bank. Twice I have found a braided leather bracelet in places it should not have been. Once on the hood of my truck in a car wash bay. Once on my kitchen table after a storm that took out power for 2 days. I do not wear jewelry, but sometimes, when I'm tired and the hunger inside the whispering sounds like relief, I pick one up and hold it and feel the warmth soak into my palm and set it down again. If you stop on 84 between Sweetwater and Lubbock at night, you may hear what the truckers hear. You may see eyes in places eyes do not belong. If you do, and if something calls you down into the roots with a promise that sounds like a person whose name you remember, lean back toward the blacktop and make your world smaller. You could say the shapes that move from limb to limb are only owls. You could say the whispering is wind in leaves. You can say a lot of things in daylight. At night, if you shine your light up, they will scatter. The beam will cross and you will see too many eyes, and you will feel your own hands answer the air with a grip that they did not learn from you. You may pull someone out. It will not be the end of a story. It will be the beginning, and the trees will nod together like jurors who have reached the verdict they wanted all along.